we are. Okay, so the first order of business that we'd like to start is just taking a roll call, just so we have it on record about who is here. Don't worry about letting us know who you're affiliated with, but maybe initially we can just go around and introduce our names. I'm going to start with just calling some of the virtual folks and take care of that. Elizabeth, how about you go? What is your name?
Elizabeth Finney.
Got it. Okay, and I'll just let people talk on here.
I'll grab it. Good morning, Kathy Decker.
Good morning, Meg Modley.
Hi, Mary Beth Deller.
And Mike?
Good morning, Mike Bald from Littleton.
Katie Kane.
Pop.
Jillian Audier.
Stephen Davidson.
Stephanie Smith, Agency of Agriculture Staff.
Stephen Dwinell, Vermont Agency of Agriculture Food Markets, Director of the Public Health and Agriculture Research Management Division.
Judy Rosofsky.
Toby Alexander.
Ann Hazelring.
Bonnie Donahue.
Kim Jensen.
Van Dillner.
Emily Inouye. How's the sound? Can you all hear us over there? Good? Okay.
I could hear everybody except the gentleman at the far end of the table. I could hear Toby, but not the other person.
Steve.
Steve.
Thank
Okay.
you.
You'll talk out. So welcome. First of all, I just want to acknowledge we finally got here. So it's something that I've certainly been looking forward to, and we so appreciate people's willingness to come to the table and help us with this project. I want to acknowledge that there's been like decades of work that went into this proceeding committee, and we're just going to be building off of that. So we are really grateful for all the work that has gotten us to this point. So thank you very much. And I just want to hand it over to Steve. He is our director, and he's going to have a couple words of welcome for everybody.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Hear me? Okay, thank you. Yeah, like Emily said, really appreciate everybody coming. This is something we have been working toward, having this meeting. Without going too far back into the history, I think the pertinent thing today is that this committee is now established in a state rule. It's not just a, sort of amorphous group that gets together. This is an actual official committee, members appointed by the secretary and given a very specific charge under the rule, which of course is based on the state law. And the specific charge for the committee is to make recommendations to the secretary for amendments to the noxious weed rule. So really the committee has one specific job to do, which is to identify noxious weeds that need to be added to the rule so that the department or the agency can enforce the noxious weed rule. The changes have to be adopted by rule, so we'll have to go through rulemaking, which what we're looking forward to is a recommendation, a list of plants to be added to the rule that we will take forward and go through the whole rulemaking process with. So that's the formal function of the committee. But obviously, with this many experts in the room and knowledgeable people, there could be other discussions and other sharing of information about situations that we're dealing with. And we hope that happens too. And I think we've got it set up so that that can happen. However, there's no authority granted to the committee other than to identify the individual species to be added to this. So the committee can't recommend that a particular agency do any particular thing or that any landowner do any particular thing. That's not the committee. The committee doesn't have that authority to make those kind of recommendations. Information can be shared about what needs to happen and advice, provided. But the only authority the committee has is to add species to the list. And Emily, you talk about we'll get into it obviously, but there's a particular process that we think should be followed for that.
Yeah, we've drafted up a process that we'd like to discuss with everybody. It's in that document, and we'll get to it a little bit later. But I just wanted to quickly just go over the format of this meeting, so we're all on the same page about where we're going with this. Are you all set, Steve, with
Yeah.
your partners? Okay, so we're gonna take some time for introductions. I don't know everybody here, and I would love to hear about your organization and if you have any history working on this stuff, what it is, and maybe just share your perspective, your interests, and maybe what resources you're actually bringing to our committee that you might be able to provide. So that's going to be our first section. And then we're going to quickly go over the operations guidelines. It is in draft format, so this is open for discussion, but we kind of created a scaffolding for this committee to start building off of. And then Kim Jensen has graciously agreed to go over some of the documents that have been generated and created over many years. And some of them are obviously foundational to the work of this committee. So she's identified for us some of the stuff that we think would be incredibly helpful to incorporate into this committee also, and to just keep moving it forward. And then we'll have a quick break, and then Steve's going to lead a discussion around just process and any other thing that organically comes up. And then because this is a public meeting, we have about 15 minutes of open period for the public. And looking around right now, I do not believe we have any members of the public participating.
Except me.
You're not. Okay, yes, you're Plant Health with us right now. That's how I'm going to label you. So that's kind of the way we're going to go about it. So I will start, just Emily Inouye, Agency of Agriculture. I'm with Plant Health, and I'm not technically a committee member, but I will be joining all of you and facilitating this committee in doing some really good work. So the agency will be bringing some resources to this committee that they haven't had prior, administratively primarily, but that's kind of my role in the resources that I bring. Katie, would you mind starting?
Sure. Katie Kane, I work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I work for a program called the Partners for Fish and Wildlife Program, which is our private land habitat restoration program. So I work all across the state, myself and other biologists, to do habitat restoration with private landowners. So invasive plants are obviously a huge part of that. So we see a lot of sites across the state and do a lot of management of lands with private landowners. So we kind of bring a lot of years of just seeing the landscape across the state and working on those projects. And for myself personally, before joining Fish and Wildlife Service, I worked for the National Park Service for Joshua Tree, managing their invasive plant program. So this is kind of my background.
Hey everyone, Bob Pop. I'm the botanist for the Fish and Wildlife Department, and I keep track of all the rare, threatened, and endangered plants in the state. And peripherally, I deal with invasives because they're often a threat to the more rare species. I've been on this committee, well, I guess this is the first meeting, so I haven't been, but I've been involved with the informal predecessor of this committee since its inception, which was, do you remember, Kim? That predates you, I think.
Predates me, but wasn't it
Yeah.
in
It
the
was,
90s?
I think it was like the 90s or something.
I want to say 1999 or maybe even before.
I guess it's when the noxious weed statute was first passed. That's when we formed the committee. What else? Oh, I guess I should be upfront about this. This is my first meeting, and it will also be my last meeting, as I'm retiring next month. But we felt it was important to have somebody from Fish and Wildlife represented on the committee, and hopefully my successor will be appointed. I think it's important to have a botanist on the committee who deals with the plant issues in the state. So that's it.
Right.
I'm Jillian Audier. I'm from Marsh Billings Rockefeller National Park. I'm part of the natural resource team there, so we do a lot of work with invasives. And I'm not actually a committee member, I'm just tag along with Steve.
Okay.
I'm Steve Mortillo. I'm the Natural Resources Program Lead for Marsh Billings Rockefeller and St. Gaudens National Historical Parks. They're both two somewhat small parks that have a history of horticulture on the property. So there's been long established gardens for 100 years. And as a result, we've got residual species in our forest that we manage. I plan the invasive plant management activities for both parks in collaboration with our forestry partners and regional botanists and staff. I'm not a botanist myself, so my perspective is mostly operational. And I collect data in the field to monitor invasive species. So that's my perspective. My resources are, my time, and if there's something that I feel like I don't have the expertise to answer, potentially the time of other regional experts that we consult with regularly. So typically when I have a question, I'll reach out to the Northeast Temperate Network quantitative ecologist who, is an advisor to many, many different parks. So those are the resources that I have to bring.
Awesome. Thank you.
I'm Steve Davidson. I work at Worsford's Nursery. I've been there for 10 years. It's like the repertoire in front of me. I have a first-hand experience, on-hand experience in allocation of trees, shrubs, annuals, perennials, where they're coming from, how certain things, like last year, we had a problem with rhododendron and starting to be introduced to the control of those types of things. So I guess my expertise and what I could help with is, the procedural side of nursery allocation of plants and how we might be able to set up structures to prevent certain plants to get into the state.
And Stephanie and Steve and Judy aren't technically committee members, but maybe you can just quickly say your name and how you're affiliated with us.
Yes, Stephanie Smith. I work for the Agency of Agriculture. I'm the Deputy Director in Plant Health, Agriculture, and Agriculture Resource Management. And my background, actually, I went to school for landscape architecture. I have a master's in landscape architecture. But I've been with the agency for about 10 years, and I work with Emily, Ben, and Judy talking about these issues, both invasive plants, nursery work, working with the federal government when there's a federal pest that's involved or is present in our state, just help out generally. Thanks.
Jude?
Hi, I'm Judy Rosovsky. I'm a state entomologist. I'm also a former member of the former committee, the VIEPC, not to be confused with the VIEPAC. And I have 35 years of experience with invasive species. So that is my resources, my longevity in this area. I'm also the state plant regulatory official. So any federal pests, and a pest is a plant, insect, disease, whatever. Then I'm the liaison between our federal partners and state staff and allies. So thank you, everyone, for being here. This is great to see this group assembled officially.
Yeah. So Steve Dwinell, I've introduced myself before. Just my background, I'm an entomologist also, primarily agricultural and structural pest control entomologist. And I've only been I moved to Vermont in July, took this position the end of September last year. But prior to that, did essentially the same type of position in Florida for about 25, 26 years. So a lot of experience with invasive. The program I was administered in Florida was not part of the invasive species, but we worked real closely with the division of plant industry there on a lot of invasive species issues. We regulated the pesticides and the pesticide applicators and that kind of thing. So we worked real closely with the division of plant industry down there. So.
Nice. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Toby Alexander. I'm the state biologist and forester for the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service. So we have conservation programs that fund up well, a variety of things. I focus on more upland habitat and forestry practices. And I support our field offices across the state in implementing those practices. And so we do a great deal of invasive plant control. I helped get that going back in the early 2000s, making sure we were in compliance with all the agency of ag and wetland rules and all that sort of thing. I was on this prior committee back in the 2000s, early 2000s, and was with Bob and Kathy and some others I see, and Mary Beth. And so, and we did do some data sheets back then. I remember doing some sheets to recommend species for quarantine. And so that was an interesting process. So I guess as far as resources, I'm kind of like Judy, I've been around long enough where I know a few things at least. And, you know, we have significant funding for invasive plant control for private landowners. And it's, you know, at least $250,000 a year, upwards of 400,000 in some years. So it's not bad. So
That's great.
Can I add something? Toby was instrumental in first identifying the European black alder glutinosa, that was mistakenly being planted all over the state by a bunch of nurseries who misidentified it. So thank you, Toby, for that.
Good job.
Which plant was that, Bob?
Aldus glutinosa, the European black alder.
those are bad memories.
Yeah, that was not a good experience, but thankfully you caught it when you did.
Yeah. A little late, but.
Thank you, Toby.
Ann Hazelrig, I'm a plant pathologist with UVM Extension, associate professor there. I also run the plant diagnostic clinic, so my interest is, this clinic is for commercial growers, home gardeners to send in disease, insect, and weed samples for identification, and then we make management recommendations based on IPM principles. I also oversee the Master Gardener program, the pesticide education program, IPM program, and do some aphis trapping in my spare time. But my interest, you know, I have no, you know, I identify weeds, but I use the guys in the UVM Pringle for burying them a lot. If I was closer, I'd probably use Bob. But
my name is Bonnie Donahue. I am the landscape architect for VTrans, and I started with VTrans about 1.5 years ago, so I'm still learning. Most of my work is in the project design side, though some of my work, I mean, it goes into construction, and then I'm also trying to get more involved with maintenance too, but my primary job description is like planning, designing projects at the, you know, to go to construction. So, and because I'm the one landscape architect, most of the, and in the environmental group, most of the invasive plant questions seem to, or any vegetative questions seem to be funneled to me and another individual. So it's part of my job to work on these things. I'm also a master gardener. So that just taught me a ton. Yes.
Hi, my name is Kim Jensen. I work with the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation Aquatic Invasive Species Program, also called the Aquatic Nuisance Control Program. We have a state statute that is responsible for aquatic nuisance species statewide. We are basically charged with dealing with aquatic plants and animals. So some of the species we deal with kind of falls off this particular subject matter, but there's definitely some challenges there. I'm also the co-chair of the Northeast Aquatic Nuisance Species Panel. I work with Meg Mobley on that panel. And then I also have been recently charged with taking on aquatic nuisance control permitting as well for the state. So that will be in addition to the responsibilities I have. I have been co-chair of the VIEPC for the last few years with Mary Beth. Deller. And when I came on, I thought it was important to develop some vision and mission and kind of a flow sheet on how species were put on the list. And also just trying to manage the very large list that we have of fact sheets and so on and so forth. So Bob, Karen, or Kathy, I'm sorry, Elizabeth, Mary Beth, Judy, Toby, thank you all for being here and for participating in this. We've definitely have a lot of great people sitting in the room, and Katie too, I know you're part of it, that have more knowledge than I. And I'm glad that you're all sitting here, either virtually or in the room, because there's been a lot of great work over 30 years by many people. And I'm so glad that we're starting again, because it's really a necessary responsibility for the state.
Thank you.
My name is Ben Dellner, staff member with the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, member of the plant health team. So not a member of the committee formally, but excited to be able to sit in on it. You know, our team is essentially responsible for administering the noxious weed roll. And me personally, I'm kind of heading up the nursery inspection program, which does end up dealing a bit with noxious weeds that, you know, are ending up in the nursery trade. And I do also have a pretty strong background in plant ecology and botany. So kind of excited to, you know, hear what folks have to say, and also, you know, pick Bob's brain a little bit. Yeah, so that's where I'm at.
Thanks, Ben.
Okay, Elizabeth, you're up.
All right, good morning, all. So I'm Elizabeth Spinney. I work for the Department of Forest Parks and Recreation. I'm part of the Forest Health section team as the invasive plant project coordinator. Most of our projects of which are grant funded, and our current projects are focused on invasive plant phenology monitoring and early detection. I have served on the previous committee during my stint as a limited service non-permanent position in various roles. And I certainly don't have the breadth of history with this previous committee that many in the room today have. And so I'm so appreciative of the opportunity for all of us to share that out today.
Thank you. Meg, would you be willing to go?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Meg Modley, I'm the Aquatic Invasive Species Management Coordinator at the Lake Champlain Basin Program. For those of you not familiar with the Lake Champlain Basin Program, we're a federally authorized, really nonprofit organization funded by the Environmental Protection Agency, the National Park Service, the Great Lakes Fishery Commission. We get some money from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and NOAA. My role is really to work at the federal, state, and local levels in the Lake Champlain watershed. So that includes the provincial levels in Quebec and New York. So I was sort of on the tail end of the former group. I was engaged and involved in following along the work that was going on. I'm a member of the National Aquatic Nuisance Species Task Force, and I'm a member of the Northeast Aquatic Nuisance Species Panel with Kim, and we're really focused regionally in the New England states at looking at early detection and monitoring of both aquatic, freshwater, and marine species. I sort of carry the approved U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Lake Champlain Basin aquatic nuisance species management plan in concert with New York, Vermont, and Quebec. I do serve on the New York Invasive Species Council Advisory Committee and was part of their process of reviewing and evaluating and listing different species for possession, sale, transport, etc. Kim and I work very closely together on really implementing our rapid response plan for invasive species in the watershed. We're currently responding to Eurasian water milfoil in Lake Eden, as well as round goby, trying to keep it out of coming up into Lake Champlain. My primary role is really to facilitate and coordinate partners to administer grants. We give out a lot of funding, mostly for boat launch steward type of activities or greeter programs, so prevention, but we do a lot of management and implementation, like water chestnut management in Lake Champlain, or early detection, monitoring, and response. One exciting piece, just to make everybody aware, the Vessel Incidental Discharge Act, which passed at the end of 2018, actually created a Great Lakes Lake Champlain invasive species program. It hasn't been, no funding has been appropriated, but as a result of that, we are funding a graduate student to populate a Lake Champlain aquatic nuisance species or non-Indigenous species information system, which will be the mirror of the GLANCIS system, if you're familiar with it, which will allow us to run risk assessments and watch lists for aquatic species that we might be concerned about.
Awesome. Thank you. Cool. All right, Mary Beth.
Hi, I'm Mary Beth Deller. I'm the botanist for the Green Mountain and Finger Lakes National Forests in Vermont and New York. I sat on the previous committee for many years, dating back into the early 2000s, not since the beginning, but shortly after that. And a lot of my role on the National Forest with invasive species is to write mitigation measures into ground disturbing project proposals to prevent the introduction of invasive plants or prevent their spread or control them before, during, or after project implementation. I also sit on the Finger Lakes PRISM in New York State, and I am on the steering committee for 2 different SISMAs in Vermont. And I'd say one of my main interests is to find a way to fund a system similar to New York's PRISM system, because I think we desperately need that structure and support in Vermont. I have a pesticide applicator's license, and I use it primarily to contract out control of infestations on the National Forest. And I think that kind of sums up where I'm at.
Great, thank you. All right, Mike.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for having me. I'm in Royalton. A shout out to Mary Beth for getting me started in this line of work. Thank you, Mary Beth, and good luck, Bob. Congratulations. Brilliant. Yeah, I'm in Royalton. This is year 13 for, just so there's no confusion. See, that's it. Got weeds. Okay. The t-shirts are popular. I work from, yeah, Mary Beth got me started with the National Forest, but then I started doing danger plants. So sometimes you'll see me log into a meeting. This is a giant hogweed. Sometimes you'll see me log in as Heracleum, but that's the explanation there. If I'm trying to go Latin. So my geography is basically the New York side of the lake to Cape Cod. I've gone to Ireland a couple times, but that was very informative, actually. I manage roughly 900 acres directly, and then I coach people. I train and act as a resource for people on about twice that much. So I don't know. I'm associated with about 3,000 acres, I guess, of non-chemical terrestrial invasives control, management, monitoring, follow-up, planning, all that, the whole path. I'll just add my quick background is a bachelor's degree in biology. Then I was in the Army. Combat engineering is actually pretty good stuff if you're trying to figure out the lay of the land and how to read the land and how things flow back and forth and so forth, transmission vectors, things like that. I am a NOFA member and I go to the soils conferences, so I get get to hang out with all the soils, composting, vegetation, farm, agricultural people. which is great. The Forest Service background quickly is just fisheries, the NEPA program, and I did a couple of Western fires. And in addition to doing invasive species at this point, I do hazard trees and apple trees, and that also gets me out on the land 11 months out of the year. So thanks again for having me.
Well,
I
thanks.
have to turn off the camera just to be able to stay connected.
Totally
Sorry.
fine. Thank you. Okay, and last but not least, not a committee member, but very important, Kathy.
Thanks, Emily. Yeah, I'm not a committee member, but I played one in a previous life. Yeah, it's so cool to see, again, everybody from the previous group. So anyway, Kathy Decker, I work for the Department of Forest Parks and Recreation. I oversee the Forest Protection Program, which, as Elizabeth mentioned, is insects, disease, and plants, mainly invasive plants, of course. So my connection is I like Mary Beth had been part of this group for in the previous rendition, probably in the early 2000s is when I started as well, and that's when I think it was DEC was heavily involved and Bob was there, and it was really a big effort to kind of come together as a group to form some semblance of, hey, how can we deal with these invasive plants? My interest is in the forest, so the terrestrial side. I'm really an idiot when it comes to aquatics. I don't really know anything about it, but as far as terrestrial invasives and trying to keep them, out of some of our important environments in Vermont, is really key. So really excited. Thank you guys in Ag. Judy and Stephen and Steph and Amy. Thank you for finding this important and bringing us together and actually including so many of the previous entities that helped form where we are today. So I'm thankful that you invited me, and I will kind of sit back and enjoy the conversation. So thanks so much.
It's good to have you, Kathy. Thank you. Okay, well, we are 45 minutes ahead of schedule. So nobody ever complains about a meeting ending early, but I'm sure there are actually lots of things to talk about. So, okay, moving on to the next thing. Just wanted to kind of go over the general operations guidelines. And like I said, this is a draft. So as we go through it, if anybody has anything that they want to provide feedback, have any issues about, just feel free to chime in. The folks virtually, feel free to raise your hand. I will be monitoring it and I will call you. If for some reason I miss it, just chime in.
Hey, Emily,
Yes.
one comment. So if there's a lot of discussion, we should stack names so we have keep an order, and maybe, since I can do it or Ben can do it, however you want to do it.
Okay.
Just stack names for discussion.
You mean based on the people?
Yeah,
who
when
want it?
people, if there's a
Got
lot
it.
of discussion.
Got it. Yep.
Hey, do you have more of the guidelines?
I do. Is anybody here who doesn't have?
And are they available for the people online?
They should be. Are you all okay with the guidelines? Okay.
Is there one for Ann?
There's one for Anne.
Maybe you can also put it on the screen.
Yeah, I think that's a good
I
idea.
know it's not good to work.
I'm also gonna, I guess, share it on the screen. I think.
Yeah, I am on the internet.
Okay, thanks.
All right, I'm gonna share my screen here. Okay. So see it?
I don't see it on the screen.
Oh, okay. I'll give it back to Ann.
Okay, we are actually we're not gonna go through this line by line, just kind of the important stuff that is actually kind of action oriented and focusing on process. So as most of us are here. I think everybody is here. The only representative who wasn't able to make it is the USDA APHIS PPQ representative. And that will be Catherine Arroyan, who will be starting as the state plant health director probably next month or so. But we have not left them out. They're just in a point of transition, but they will be joining the committee as well. So here is the full list that everybody has access to. Oh, and Lynn McNamara, I'm sorry, is also not here from the TNC, but she is part of the committee also. So what are we going to provide and give to the committee as administrative support? And I think this is a big difference from prior groups. We will be taking on some of the things that are not fun to do. We will find and organize meetings. Since this is a public process, we'll make sure that it's properly warned to the public. We will set the meeting agenda with all of you. We will be incorporating everybody's feedback into it, but we'll take on that responsibility, and we'll also facilitate committee meetings. And we had a lot of conversation around this, but you know, there was always the idea of, is a chair really necessary if we're going to be providing all this administrative stuff? And chair work is quite a bit of work and responsibility. So we decided we wanted to, you know, just take that off of any one committee member, and we can help facilitate the conversations in support of your work. So that's kind of where we landed with that. And then we will organize work. There will be stuff presumably generated by this committee, so we can compile it and make sure it's organized and saved properly in different files. We'll record the meeting and keep minutes. The meetings will be available to all of you. We will send them out after the meeting. We will also post them for the public along with this video for the public to have access to, along with distributing any other pertinent information that comes out of this work. We will post it on that VIEPAC website that Steph kindly put together for us. And then from, you know, the actual recommendation point, we'll serve as kind of your liaison to our secretary. Right now it's Secretary Anson Tebbett. So what I guess we would we'll talk about how you get there, but we would be taking your recommendations and bringing it directly to the secretary and, you know, being that pipeline for you all. As I mentioned, this is an open meeting, so the public is allowed to attend, and we'll have access to everything that we have for transparency's sake. There are a bunch of rules associated with that, none of which you need to know, but go ahead and feel free to read through it if you're not familiar with it. We do need to make sure that we have proper records of certain things, like who's at the meeting, what the vote looks like, and just making sure that we record things in all of our process. So the recommendation portion for listing and delisting plant species to the secretary. As Steve mentioned, the committee's role in this iteration is primarily to make those, or solely to make the recommendations to the Secretary of Agriculture around what plant species to add or to delist. And to get to that process, it is in statute, but there was a kind of flow chart that was provided. I mean, I just want to go over that so that we're all on the same page about what the statutory expectations are. So the following procedure is what is expected. The secretary will look at your recommendations and take those into consideration when they decide. You know, I don't know if it'll be Anson, it'll be somebody else in the future, but they will, their responsibility is to take your recommendations, listen, understand what the reasoning is for your recommendation, and then make a decision based on that input. This committee is supposed to review the full list of prohibited weed lists. That's the Class A and Class B, in other words, the noxious weed list, once every year. So we'll have to set up a process to go over the list and, you know, see if there's any changes that you'd like to make, or have conversations around the species listed. And then Kim is going to talk more about this, but the PRAs, I know that a lot of work was went into developing the pest risk assessments or is it plant risk assessments or pest risk?
Plant evaluation.
Okay.
Yeah, we had a different name.
Okay, so there is a process to assess the risk of certain plant species in the form of a full-on, like 4 or 5 pages of information. And Kim's going to go over that because it's already been developed. And there's no sense in reinventing a good wheel. So we do have to go through that process in order to get to that recommendation, whether it's to list or delist. So that is an important part of this process. There are different points to evaluate within the PRAs, and we can go over all that when Kim goes over the actual documents. Once the committee comes to a recommendation, we're going to have to talk about the vote process and what that looks like. But once a recommendation is formalized by this group, that process is going to look like somebody, and we will work with you, a formal letter will be submitted to the secretary, but we will take care of writing that letter. We'll work with the committee. We will summarize the recommendation and then forward that on to the secretary and take care of the conversation with that. The committee won't be in the dark during that process. We will probably send a draft of that letter prior to sending it to the secretary. And then certainly we'll get back to committee members with what the secretary's ruling or, where they stand on the issue once they have incorporated and integrated the information. And, presuming that it's a recommendation to add and the secretary accepts that recommendation, the process will be, we will let the committee know. And then since we need to go through the rulemaking process to add plant species, we would go through the process and initiate the rulemaking process to make those additions and changes to the weed list. And then, if there's any concerns around legal issues or whatever, we do have an attorney with the agency that is available. I don't know if that's likely to come up, but it's available if something sticky comes up. So that kind of is the outline of what we have right now. I just want to open it up for comments or concerns, questions for a couple minutes. Anybody have any?
Yeah, I threw a question in the chat.
Okay.
This is Kathy.
Yep.
I thought, and this is, again, I don't know why, but that the current rule, like the newer rendition that we're looking at now, allowed for species to be added without going through rulemaking. I think that was one of the blocks before, is every time you wanted to add species, you had to open the rule. And I thought this caveat of the secretary being able to decide made that so you didn't have to open the rule every time. You could just add the species. And maybe I'm incorrect in that.
Yeah, my understanding is we still have to go through the rulemaking process as it's written right now. I think there had been discussion at some points to figure out a process that wouldn't require that. But as it stands right now, as it's written, it does need to go through the rulemaking process.
Yeah. So
Yes.
the rule itself is, for folks that look into this kind of stuff, it's 203121. It's quarantine number 3 noxious weeds. And there's a specific section 4 is designation as a noxious weed. It talks about the process that Emily just described, which is based on the process you all have already developed. But then section F says, at the secretary's discretion, the noxious weeds recommended by the committee will be added to either A or B list of prohibited species. Which means to be put on the list, it's a list of the rule, you got to go through rulemaking. So, I mean, and I think you want to go through rulemaking in that case, because you're talking about, having an impact on nurseries or private landowners or whatever. So you want to go through rulemaking. You don't just want to add a species to the list. You'll want to go through the formal rulemaking process.
Steve, could I, I'm sorry.
What?
There's another hand up.
Oh, sorry.
Or I just have I don't know what rulemaking is. Could someone
Okay,
tell
so,
me?
so rulemaking is a formal process where the agency, you have to have the authority to adopt the rule first under the statute, which we do. Then we propose it first to a committee called the Interagency Committee of Administrative Rules. So all the state agencies are advised that we're going to go through this process. So if there are any comments or concerns, we can deal with it there. Then we publicly notice it. And there's a comment period. We file with the Secretary of State. It gets published in, I think, 15 newspapers around the state, along as on our website. And there's public notifications, so everybody's aware of it. We have a comment period. We have a public hearing. People can comment on it. Then when that's finished, we respond to the comments. Then we go to another committee called the Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules, LCAR, which is actually a standing committee of both senators and representatives. And we present the rule to them, and they have the opportunity to comment on it. And then when that all is done, then we can adopt it.
Like 30 days later.
Well, it takes a while. And so it's a long process and it costs a little money, but it's the appropriate way to make public, if you're going to adopt something that has an impact on the public, you want to go through rulemaking, not just say, hey, this is the rule now.
I just want to add to Steve's comment. I think, Steve, you had it exactly right, that my experience with the endangered species statute is we can add things to the endangered species list without going through rulemaking, but the burden of proof is then on the agency. Whereas if we go through rulemaking, the burden of proof would be on anybody contesting it. It's like by default, it's on the list.
Right.
So it's this legal procedure and it is labor intensive and time consuming. That's why we don't do it very frequently with the endangered species rule or you folks with the quarantine rule. But I think in the end, it's probably worth it to have that statutory authority behind you, if you will.
Right. And once it's gone through the whole process, then it's adopted and it's enforceable.
Should be.
Right, so one concern I would have with this is in my experience, we just changed the hemlock woolly adelgid rule and that took 3 years. And if we're talking about trying to add noxious weeds to the list so we can take enforcement action or do rapid response, 3 years isn't a rapid response. So I don't know if there's a way we could do what Bob just detailed, that you can actually add it to the list right away or go through the rulemaking process.
There might be an emergency listing rule where you can list something for 30 days, but then you got to get the paperwork done. I mean, I don't know that we've ever done that, but I think that.
I mean, does anyone else share that concern that this could be too time consuming to be effective for our needs?
Well, what I'll say is that rulemaking is something that shouldn't take that long if it's done right. This shouldn't be controversial. I mean, what delays rules is controversy if somebody doesn't like what you're doing for some reason. But designating a plant as a noxious weed, should be pretty straightforward.
Well, might some nurseries object to that if they're trying to sell it?
Well, but that's where you.
Very
Right, that's where you have to go through the process and have it defensible.
It's also not just the process itself, it's the pressure that the nursery workers get from the owner, from the customer trying to purchase a plant from out of state that may or may not be on a list that we may or may not be aware of. There's a lot of smaller pieces to working at a nursery that you experience that you're not really sure how and who to contact if something does come up. There's no anonymous structure to reporting anything. It really produces kind of like a hush hush type feeling as far as if we do find something. I had first-hand experience last year with Ben and Judy on sudden oak death in broadleaf rhododendrons that came from the West Coast. And you guys saw the procedural side of controlling that. And I saw firsthand the let's get this done as fast as possible because we had to shut the nursery down because we're losing money. So there's a lot of pieces to, I think, creating, not necessarily a paper trail, but a structure for just the general public to make these anonymous suggestions of noxious weeds, especially the plants that harbor certain pests. So I personally feel like it would be worth the committee's time and just a procedure and process to random homeowner being able to make a suggestion. I know there's a lot of resource questions of like who's going to deal with all that and all the paperwork, but having an open channel for people to communicate that stuff might help speed up that process of 3 years paperwork wise. It also might introduce things faster to the committee who doesn't have as much firsthand or hands-on experience with something that might pop up.
Yeah, Kim.
So I think the charge of the former committee was to do a lot of education and outreach. And so developing the watch list. So what are the plants that we think are coming? What are the plants that we know are going to be here soon? And developing that watch list was that hands-on, hey, watch out for this. So it's kind of the vehicle to allow people to understand that this is coming down the pike eventually. So we should be aware of that. So it shouldn't be a surprise to nurseries or homeowners that particular like that particular plant.
I have a question about that watch list, if it's okay. So the watch list isn't regulatory. It can't be regulatory. So I guess the question is, how does that get presented to the public without it having the weight of, regulation attached to it?
So it was an informal document.
Okay.
So there was, I think we posted it on the vtinvasives.org website, which is the website that is shared between FPR, UVM Extension, and Vermont DEC. So that's a public face to the former ad hoc committee. And so that was posted. I think it was taken down because the Agency of Ag, and I hope that everything is going to be freely to discuss kind of the challenges that we have.
Should be transparent. Let's have a conversation. Yeah.
That was not a regulatory document, so it was taken down. But still, that was a working document that we used in the committee to talk about those pressures coming. And I just wanted to mention also that the aquatic nuisance control statute, in the statute, it says plants and animals as designated by the secretary. So Steve, I wanted you to hear that. So in the aquatic nuisance control statute, we don't have to go through rulemaking to add species to the statute. We can just, the secretary can designate a species. So it kind of allows us to add species that are under those EDR, early detection rapid response events that are incoming that we expect may be here within the next few years. One example is round goby. It's in New York. It's in the Champlain, not Champlain, no, not yet. Anyway. So we expect that may be coming. So how can we address that incoming species quickly if it does arrive in Champlain?
I had a question relative to the authority for the secretary to designate an aquatic nuisance without having to go through rulemaking. Is that, and you may have said this and I missed it, but I'm taking notes. So is that outlined in the statute? So it's specifically authorized in statute. Would you be able to get me that citation? Because potentially, if it already exists, there's a way potentially for the agency to not go through rulemaking, but go through legislative process.
Right.
But that's even more cumbersome sometimes.
Along those lines, we do in our nursery, or maybe it's chapter 84, title 6, the statement that the secretary can designate a pest. I don't know if that would allow us to.
Right. So just so we don't spend the whole time talking about this, I think it's a concern raised by the committee. We'll go back, we'll investigate what our, rapid authority is. I think still relative to the committee's work, we still need to go through the rulemaking to add species to the rule. But the, responding to something that's emergent could be a separate process. that we just have to make sure we have the authority to do. We'll find out what our authority is. And we probably already have that authority. If I look at chapter 84
Oh, yeah.
right here, you can probably interpret it to do it. But that's separate than publishing the weed list.
Correct.
So it's a separate thing.
Yeah, and I will add that we have never done that. We've never added another species yet. So we were actually gonna move towards what exactly that means in the future. So if we do quickly need to add a species, what does that look like in the long term? And how does it get on the noxious weed list? And if it's an animal, whose jurisdiction is that, you know, so. So that's a long conversation as well.
Steve, I saw your hand raised.
You can take Bob first, because mine's a little bit unrelated.
Okay, Bob.
Well, mine was about the watch list. I don't know, is that a separate agenda? I know more should we just.
I can talk about the watch list later on when we're talking about the
Okay,
process.
that's
Steve's
fine. I
gonna
just didn't
lead
wanna
that
lose
discussion.
sight.
Yeah, no,
I think it's
thank you,
important
though.
to discuss that.
Absolutely. Okay.
So for the National Park Service, there are additional considerations for us and what we are authorized to recommend. And in some cases, we are not authorized to recommend something that's going to potentially deleteriously impact a business. So I need to take this back to kind of our legal team, and the way that this is written is going to make a big difference in the way at least the National Park Service could potentially participate in it. So that's just like an aside, and I don't know if other federal agencies have the same consideration, but we have different set of regulations.
Fair enough.
Right, good point.
Okay, yeah, Mike.
Yeah, thank you. Everyone can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, that's interesting what Steve just said from the national parks, because I was going to give an example. I've heard the aquatic, and I've heard we all know the big threat of spread on boats and boat trailers and so forth. But one of the projects I'm getting involved with right now is the Conti Refuge, so federal agency, and tracking, mapping, understanding where Japanese stiltgrass is in Windham County.
Well,
So it's definitely there. It is present. I can confirm that. It could be as far north as Bellows Falls. That's what I'm supposed to find out. But here's the question about impacting other businesses. It is actually, Japanese stiltgrass is in downtown Brattleboro along the Whetstone Brook. And it is literally right around people's backyard propane tanks. So that ruled out flaming for me as a treatment option, because I'm kind of a common sense kind of guy. But then I started going to the propane delivery companies. I mean, this was last fall. I could just see that all it takes is 3 companies to deliver their propane rounds for the day, and you've got stiltgrass seed along their route. So I see the propane delivery companies and all the utilities, and certainly Bonnie from VTrans has probably taken this note. Basically, any vehicular traffic and all the businesses associated with it are going to be impacted if we're trying to do an early detection, rapid response containment of Japanese stiltgrass, which I think we should do, just for the record. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Okay, any other comments that you would like us to take note of, to consider around these, what we just talked about?
And so many things I'd love to
Sure,
share.
I'm sure we will have time, yes. Okay, well, you know, I think we all know that the meat of the discussion is going to be in the area that Steve leads a little later, so there's going to be a lot of opportunity for that. Judy.
Sorry, I just had one quick comment about the national parks, because I realized this is basically the VAAFM noxious weed rule that we're dealing with. So national parks, I don't know that we need to have congruent language, because we're doing it for
the state of Vermont.
Right, the state of Vermont. However, your expertise and the coordination of efforts would be invaluable too, right? I just want to check that out.
Oh, yeah, I think the comment was more about what the National Park Service would be able to participate in.
Right.
Not necessarily that you should amend your rules, right?
Right, yeah.
And that might just mean that, you know, when it comes time to take a vote, I say, we've made this decision on National Park Service property,
Right.
right? And that's, and it could be around the same species we're talking about, but those are the guidance that I've been given.
Yep.
Right, and so I think, I'm not a lawyer, so I usually will, defer to the legal team in terms of that, but it is a consideration that I specifically had coming in here today.
Absolutely. Thanks for bringing it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. Well, Kim, would you like to go through some of the stuff that has been created over the years that would be valuable to this committee?
You bet. Can I pull
Awesome.
up my documents?
Yes, we can.
Can I get online?
Yep. I can get online, yes.
Great.
Let me just pull it up.
So again, this documents I'm going to be sharing with you, more people in this room and online know about the process more than I. So please, all of you, please comment if you find I'm defining things incorrectly or if you have a comment to add. So we do have a lot of different documents in keeping track of things. So I guess the first thing, even though it's probably the most complicated, is to open up the copy of the VT and NIP listing. And so that is the non-native, geez, I just forgot what it's called, invasive plant listing, and NIP. So this is all the species that are listed on the noxious weed list or quarantine list. And we have three terms for that list. I think it's funny. Noxious weed list, quarantine list, non-native list. So also included on this list are the watch lists. So there's 3 columns. So I'll take you through the columns, which might be easier. Column A is what it is, a plant. I think that we have other tabs that include animals, genus, common name, whether it's present in Vermont. Thank you. Whether it's been discovered in Vermont. Whether it has a pest risk assessment document. Can you make that a little bit bigger for folks? Just
Yes.
I see people squinting. And I'm squinting as well.
I am.
You can just go to the, yeah.
Is that better?
Maybe too far out. There you go.
Okay. Well, it's hard to find that perfect spot. I know.
Kim, I'm sorry, which document are we on?
This is the VTNNIP list.
Is this okay? More?
That's perfect.
That's
There you
okay.
go.
I'm not
Brilliant.
touching it. Or good. Okay.
Okay, so the risk assessment sheet, whether we have a pest risk assessment sheet completed. And you can see a lot of blanks in those because the early species do not have a pest risk assessment.
Does this also include subspecies or cultivars?
No.
Okay.
Which is a challenge. So this is the straight species. It doesn't have cultivars either. So the PRA author, column G, is who was the original author for that pest risk assessment sheet. Column H is the status of that pest risk assessment sheet because we realized there was a lot of gaps and the former species do not have a pest risk assessment. So we wanted to go back and create pest risk assessments for those older species. So we were in the process of completing new ones or updating old ones. What quarantine list it's on, whether it's A or B. So A is not within the state, B is found within the state. Whether it's on the watch list, so that's the list that we're anticipating those species will be coming soon for people to keep an eye out for, and for the committee members to also keep the other committee members abreast of any new populations that are springing up. So where is it? Where is it coming from? Have you seen it? To that kind of thing. So we would talk about the watch list often. K is a priority to add it to the quarantine or noxious weed list. So whether we propose to delist it or whether we propose to add it to A or B or what have you. And nursery is it being sold in the nursery? Who do we need to talk to? Where do we need to go to see if it is being found in nurseries? Is it being accidentally brought in? Those kind of questions.
Just a note on that. Most acquisitions of plants in the nursery happen in March, April, as far as ordering or throughout the winter. And those lists are usually pretty defined in that time period, and then there's special orders that come through after that. So I wonder if it would be worth nurseries being required to submit those orders. I know there's probably regulations that are going to get in the way of that, but it would be a definitive list of what you order to then double check, hey, this particular item we have on a watch list, or this is controlled, or, this is in the state or out of the state, you're going to bring it in the state. That whole ordering process, which Dave works with Judy at Horsford's, as far as Judy comes and walks around and explains to us certain protocols or things that are going on that we need to be aware of. But someone in place to regulate those ordering lists, to just as a double check, just in case something makes it on, because the out-of-state companies that produce these plants are not really in tune or aware of what Vermont's controlling, and they're not going to say no if you're going to give them money to purchase that plant. So then it shows up on a truck, and then we take it off and put it on the ground, and then it's sold and put in someone's backyard. So I'm wondering if there's a way to back up these lists with what is being brought into the state, because there really isn't a ton of nurseries that are ordering out of state.
It's a really good question. I think that's more for the Agency of Ag because they're the enforcement agency, they're the regulatory agency. And I think that there just hasn't been enough support staff to be able to receive those and to keep abreast of those kind of orders.
That would,
Oh,
so go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so far, two issues have come up that we need to take back and consider in the context of the program. One is, what is our emergency authority if something's really happening fast? And second, do we have the authority, or can we get the authority, or can we come up with a program that does exactly what you're talking about, where you notify us of what you're ordering from out of state? And we potentially have that authority, but we have to look into it. So this is directed more to Emily and Ben. Make sure we talk about that.
We will.
The other piece of this too is it might not be a plant that's on the list, but it also could be a plant that's a host for pets.
correct, right,
So
yeah.
rioters and hammerhead flatworm.
Right.
I'm a little confused here. Wouldn't the burden of responsibility be on the nurseries? I mean, if the
Yes.
agency gave them the quarantine list, it's like, these things are all illegal to buy and sell. So therefore, the nurseries just look and say, okay, I mean, it seems like it should be their responsibility and they shouldn't have to
Well,
send it to them. I mean, I, right now, just as a context in that, some of the NRCDs, Natural Resource Conservation Districts, they do plant sales and they'll send me lists and say, Bob, these are the things we're thinking of selling. There's nothing on the quarantine list, but they're thinking of things that are on the watch list and not even on the watch list that I'd say, this is potentially problematic. It'd be a good idea not to sell this if you, and, obviously I have no authority, but they're coming to me. So I recommend that. And I totally get that if the nurseries wanted to do that, but things that are on the quarantine list, I mean, that's a slam dunk. It's like, no, you cannot sell this, period.
And I think, Ben can maybe speak a little bit to this when we're out during our nursery inspections every summer. I think when I'm hearing this, one of the key things, and it's with anything invasive or exotic that we're dealing with, outreach and education. People will buy things unless they know that they're not allowed to. So one of the areas that I think, we really want to focus on is making sure that the nursery industry is more, we have more communication with them. And we could, send out reminders and these updated lists every year at a certain point in time through our listservs and say, as a reminder, you know, this is the list that you should not be ordering from. And, you know, that is a responsibility of the business to be legally operating in the state by abiding by laws and being familiar with what is legal and what's not. So I think for me, it makes sense. It's an easy way to like be a little bit more engaged with the nursery community and how we send out these messages too.
It seems like that would check some boxes with the EDR species as well, things that are not necessarily firmly on the radar. And the other question I have for you is, would that prevent the loss of funding, which I would admit, or money, right? Which I would imagine would contribute to that hush hush mentality. If you go out and purchase a whole bunch of stuff that you're on the hook for, and that's just a written off loss, I feel like there's more potential for you to just kind of not report that and sell it, right? And I don't know anything about the industry, but that's kind of what my thought was on that.
I would love to think that people would take the onus to be aware of those lists. Personally, in my experience, I know Charlie has no idea what this list is. He relies on Dave doing it, and Dave just moved on from Horse Church. So now there's someone new that's moving in that might not be aware of this list. So I 100% agree with you that the nursery itself should be fully held accountable for this. I just, in this particular position, and you know, I have no interest in throwing Horse Church under the bus, but I can just see, you know, falling through the crack and something coming in that no one even knows isn't supposed to be there. So.
Well, and I wonder too about
I'm sorry.
Yes, Dave Burke, yeah.
the big box stores. I mean, how is that ever? You know, those guys get stuff. I look at stuff and it's like zone 7.
Yeah.
So it's like, don't buy that, don't buy that.
Yeah, and I think Ben can speak a little bit to this. And Mike, I see your comment and I will read it out after Ben.
Yeah, so I mean, just to give, I mean, Vermont's nurseries credit, I mean, so I've done, well, like, yeah, 5 years now of nursery inspections. The first year I was doing them was about 10 years ago when, you know, this noxious weed list was first going into place. And we definitely did have some instances of stop sales. But really this past year, I mean, there were really only 3 instances of, you know, finding it was a Sonori maple hybrids. So really, I think nurseries are pretty well aware of the rule. You know, that I mean, it's really only probably like not even half a dozen species that would probably even make it in the nursery trade. So just to give that industry, I mean, most folks are pretty well aware. But I mean, I'm always happy to. I mean, I want to be a great resource, you know, for nurseries to send potential ordering lists and just to give more outreach. Yeah.
I see you, Judy. Can you just hang on just for a second? Are you good? Okay. Mike had a comment that folks should just hear about. The permaculture world is another body of people who order interesting species like hardy kiwi with no malicious intent, of course. But yes, that is another industry for sure. Yeah, Judy.
So this issue of plant sales and who's responsible for providing a nursery with a prohibited species in their own state is a national issue. And Anne, you mentioned the big box stores. It's a USDA Plant Protection and Quarantine is interested in this and is trying to work with some of the larger corporations, but basically has to go to every single one individually and then give them all the states' information, or all the states have to contact Amazon, Etsy, all for those, this is for online sales, but also for those orders to the big, across the state lines, it becomes a USDA issue, so.
Yeah, or US Fish and Wildlife issue too. So that's what we do with the aquatics, is we have the aquatic, the US Fish and Wildlife Service, Aquatic Nuisance Species Panel that Meg mentioned that she was a panel member of. So we work with US Fish and Wildlife Service as well. So if things cross the border, that is a federal mandate as well. So we deal with that with animals all the time.
I have a question for you, Ben. So you're talking about strictly the noxious weed list, right? When you're doing the inspections, there are definitely species that are on the watch list that we manage in the national park. We consider invasive and we know harm the environment, right? And so I think if communicating more with the nurseries gives the, you know, the state more of an opportunity to intervene early in that process and say, okay, this is on the watch list. You know, you can legally purchase this, but maybe you want to explore another option. I think that might help solve that problem. So there's like regulation, and then there's, you know, just kind of like taking a more grassroots approach, right? And can you bake that into the system, that communication, so that you're able to intervene in a way that's not with a fine or something like that.
I just want to say that currently the watch list isn't, I mean, this is the first, I mean, I've heard about a watch list, but this is the first time I'm hearing about and I work at the agency.
Yeah, no, there's no regulatory authority.
Yeah, there's no
anywhere.
authority. So, and I want to also say that we at the agency, if anyone asked us a question on anything, we would always reply and provide information to whomever is asking the question. And so we, you know, once we have a process or something established as a watch list that we publicize and or share with anyone, you know, based on National Park Service, based on this group's work, you know, we will certainly share that information. And again, we would answer any questions. And we do have, you know, as Emily mentioned earlier, we have a website now for this particular group. And I also wanted to say we have a blog with the Public Health and Agricultural Resource Management Division. And when we have like timely information that we want to share, like this would probably slot into that timely information once we establish like what that watch list is. So yeah, we're all about communication.
Yeah.
Or I mean, I don't know. I didn't say this in my introduction. I'm all about communication. And sharing information that helps everybody. So, but I feel like we need to establish what the watch list is.
Yeah.
And what it means,
Yeah, we
and
have-
even though it's not a regulatory, I mean, yes, the other group has, but you know,
Right.
within this this context, this group.
Exactly.
Who created and maintains this list?
Well, we were all doing that, and then I was the co-chair, so it was my responsibility. So
The
it's mine.
previous VIEPC without the A in it.
Yes.
We weren't a super PAC. We were just-
That makes us.
It bothers me, actually.
So this is,
But
all-
it was a group. I mean.
Yeah. So, but I'm saying it was just sort of an ad hoc, voluntary, contributory kind of thing.
responsibilities.
Yeah, so I mean.
Well, there was a lot of thought that went into it.
Well, sure.
Yeah,
But I mean,
I don't want to.
there was really no statutory or.
Correct.
You
No,
know,
but there's a need for it, if you don't mind my interrupting.
It was things that we needed more information on before we would recommend them for the quarantine list. Because the sheet to fill out, the pest, what is it called?
That's risk assessment.
Right, pest risk analysis. There's a lot of information there.
Sure.
And some of these things, we just didn't have that information. So in a sense, the watch list was also a call for information to get it out to like working botanists, to people on that committee, like, okay, keep your eyes open for this, get reports in, we need to kind of populate these fields and provide this information. And if it does fit, then we'll move it on as a recommendation for the full quarantine. So like Ulmus glutinosa is not on the quarantine list, it's on the watch list. And I mean, that thing is, you know, it's ubiquitous now and it's a terrible problem.
Well, let me just say that I think that this could easily be a work product of the committee for the agency, where the agency maintains the list as background work before the recommendation. That's what this is. So it'd be real easy for the agency to maintain as well.
I'd also,
Emily will maintain.
I'd also add that a lot of these species are known bad actors and have been known bad actors for a long time. And so there's, I mean, like, for example, I see like wild chervil on that list, right? Yeah, so it's I think that's one of the issues, right? Is that, you know, these are things that at the National Park Service, we actively manage, we spend money on managing. And it does help our parks to, you know, to not have these being brought into the community, especially a community like Woodstock, where it's kind of like a little bit more affluent and there's a lot of horticulture that goes on.
Yeah.
Judy,
So,
I'm sorry, Judy had it.
But I was just going to clarify that I always thought the watch list, because I worked with the nurseries in the mid-2000s, was an education tool and an alert to the nurseries that these are things we're considering regulating, so that they knew, you know, not to invest an enormous amount of money in the plan on the watch list.
But it has no regulatory authority.
I know, but so when we remember in the rule change in whatever it was, 2014, you know, we spent a lot of time talking to the nursery, giving them a lot of advance notice. You know, because they've got to plan ahead about what they're going to sell. And so if they know we're thinking of putting X on the list, then they're like, okay, well, let's not buy a whole lot of X. Or I can go talk to them and say, you're selling this, it's not illegal, but we are considering regulating this plant.
I think at that point, it wasn't on the watch list. Technically, it had been kind of predetermined that it was a recommendation that was going to be adopted. At that point, before starting to say you probably should phase out, or we are going to be phasing out. I think there was a 3-year phase out process for.
That was when we made the change. We grandfathered it, but even before that, ahead of that, we were just saying, you know.
Yeah, wasn't it like a 6-year process? And
Yeah,
it was a long process, yeah.
It was like 3 years, and then
Yep.
the phase out was 3 years. So it was
Exactly.
at least a 6-year process before something
Yep.
actually could not be sold anymore in
It
the
was
state.
Norway maple.
Yes, Stephanie.
Two
No,
other things.
I was just thinking going forward, it'd be helpful to outline what to define watch lists, to create a flow. You know, we're just like, I know we have what we've done in the past. And we have a lot of these documents, but I think to create the process for going forward that the committee will maintain as a part of the public, the plant risk assessment or audit, or, you know, whatever the A stands for, that will, you know, will develop the watch list prior. I mean, I'm going out of order, but like you create the watch list, then you do the PRAs, and then you make the recommendation to the secretary, but it starts with the watch list. And that watch list, and you can also say as a group, if you wanted to, that watch list will serve as a tool if the nursery plant health team wants to share, or will publish that. I mean, you know, because it's not regulatory and it just serves in this manner, but like outlining what it means, what it's used for, both for a communication tool and to be the first step in the PRA process, and whatever else it is that it should serve. But like establishing that flow will then inform, you know, I didn't know that Judy would go out into the field with the nurseries and share this watch list. Like, that's new to me. So, but I think like outlining that this process, this guidance, this potential procedure could help the agency, Stephanie Smith, maybe even specifically what we do with this information.
There's one other use that we've made of the watch list, or at least I have made use of it. And we have permitting authority in Act 250 and in Section 248 for energy related projects. And oftentimes developers want to do landscaping. And typically we'll just say, obviously you can't use any species on the noxious quarantine list, but I also say you cannot use anything on the watch list. And we have the authority to do that when we're reviewing these projects and issuing permits. And it's a lot easier for me to say, you know, it's anything on the watch list you can't use, and here's in reference to the watch list, rather than give them a list of like 25 plants. I mean, so it's I think it's really helpful to have that in that sense. And this way that they're not planting these things out in the wild that are potentially invasive.
And can I just point out, Elizabeth just has chimed in here. Is there any way you could just quickly just summarize what you posted for us around what Maine does for non-regulatory uses?
Sure, yeah. So the conversation brought to mind the advisory list. That is a tool that the Maine Natural Areas Program uses, which is non-regulatory, and it has species on it that aren't part of their active noxious weed list. So that's kind of the way that I have seen the Vermont unofficial watch list used is for education and outreach, and then also sort of what some of the others were describing as well.
Okay, great. Yeah, Toby.
I mean, we do the same thing for our conservation practices. We do not plant anything on the watch list. So we obviously by law can't facilitate planting the quarantine stuff, but we also don't plant anything that's on that watch list. So it's used all the time in all of our practice standards as well.
Yeah, Steve.
Yeah, so to me, I think the way to go forward on this one is when we get through the introductory stuff and talk about the process, the committee can recommend to the agency that they include this watch list as a resource document on the website, not as a non-regular, clearly, like you said, clearly explaining what it is. Say, these are the things that the responsible agencies and whatever you want to call it, the committee members are looking at. That's all we have to say. And then Ben and Emily and Judy, when they're out, they can say, well, here's the noxious weed list, but you should also be aware of this list. And it's pretty straightforward. And then when the committee is doing its work, you know, there's obviously a progression from the watch list to the noxious weed list. And so, you know, you can come in and say, hey, I think we ought to keep an eye on this one. It goes to the watch list, then you work on it for a while, and then it goes on to the noxious weed list when we adopt it.
Yeah, and Steve, just in the effort of time, we got a lot of documents to go through. So let's just wrap up and then move on and this process discussion.
So I was just gonna say that some of those species on the watch list were never gonna, I mean, we talked about them briefly to consider for quarantine, but some of them, it doesn't make sense to even try to regulate them because they're so widespread and used in different areas, agriculture, whatever, that some of that stuff, I don't see it ever making it to the
noxious list. Yeah.
But it makes sense to provide that information to people for habitat management or whatever.
But for other uses,
Yeah.
that other agencies have the authority to use it, like Bob does, then that's great.
Yeah. And then Steve, last comment before. Kim.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the only other thing I would say might be useful is that if you put this on the website, and I don't know if this is completely out of the scope, but if there was a process where greenhouses would notify the state so we would know how many species are being distributed, that data I think could be valuable.
Yeah, that's going to be, we're going to have to look into that. That could be a authority issue or a resource issue.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, Kim.
Okay, so that was a great conversation. So I think these are all the same conversations that we've had in the past, and I don't mean to bring up the past so much, and because we are moving forward, but certainly it's great to hear the echo in the room, and I appreciate all of that conversation. Okay, so we were on the watch list or short list or nursery. That's where we were.
Yes, we were.
Okay, so then the short list, long list, so that kind of gets at the short list is it here? Where is it? Is it present? Is it already, you know, everywhere, or do we have to, or is it on the long list? Is it going to come in 10 years? Is it a climate change thing? Is it climate change species? So that's why we have those. And then the action item. So what is the action item for that particular species? Is it to develop a PRA? Is it to update a PRA? So there's some action items that were decided at committee meetings. So who's going to take that on? And so we usually designated a person to take on that PRA, or that was voluntold. So then the next is referring to the vtinvasives.org webpage. So this is the public facing document of the ad hoc community committee. So the vtinvasives.org is again something the FPR, Vermont DEC, and UVM extension maintain. And so does it have a web page? Does it need a web page? Does it have a fact sheet? So the fact sheets are different from the pest risk assessment. That's kind of the building of the document for the watch list almost. It's like, what is a species, kind of what are the bare bones information of the species to develop a fact sheet for the public. So we have different fact sheets. I'm going to show you those different fact sheets. Or there are more formal fact sheets, which is like a handout. So we have different versions of fact sheets. I'll show you those. Then we also have a treatment sheet for some species. So whoever may have done the pest risk assessment and developed the fact sheet also then looked at the control measures. So how do you control this? What are the treatment practices that can be utilized? And there's only a few species that actually have treatment sheets. And then whether there's a federal fact sheet. So, you know, linking to USGS or other web pages that are out there to just help either link those resources to the fact sheets or the state web page. Then is it a New York invasive? We started to include more things as this list got larger and larger. Whether it's a New York invasive, because they're our closest neighbor. Whether, I forget, New York, can you look at the top? Sure. Oh, then that's other states. So New York has a very excellent pest risk assessment methodology that I think we should adopt because it does include climate change. It includes way more than our pest risk assessments, and it has a scale, basically. So next column is whether it's listed on the EDD maps, the early detection maps, and that's a federal and institutional mapping system. So that's the other challenge that we have, is that all of us use different mapping systems to map the invasive species. And then what are the recommendations? And then there may be notes. So this is like the overall list, just to see and understand where the information needs to be developed. Okay?
It's a lot of plants.
Yeah, and then the other tabs is the VT invasive completions, like the web page is like which pages need to be updated or developed. Other species is animal species, fungal species, reptile, I think there's reptiles in there.
So Kim, is this list what's on the website?
It's on the
Or is it on the
VIPC. It's not on the VIPAC website. It's just on the former webpage.
But not that.
Not the VTinvasives.org.
That's what I'm.
No, this is not a public facing document. This is more as an organizational tool.
So the VermontInvasives.org, that's a subset of this list?
The VTinvasives.org builds this information, and it's the public facing webpage.
And it's
So
a much
all
more truncated list.
Of course.
Yeah.
So it's a subset of the watch list.
So let's explore the webpage.
Sorry.
No, it's a great question. It's just so many moving
And
pieces.
I am a stickler for time. We got about 5 minutes just to like go through things. We can push out a couple minutes for sure.
So just briefly, the VT invasives has some of the species. So it doesn't have all of the species. So that's why we're developing that spreadsheet to see where the gaps were.
Okay.
So this list, like if you want to put up aquatic invaders and just scroll down. So there's some of the invasive species that are aquatic invaders. So you can hit, let's look loosestrife, which is probably comparison. So you can see it has, you know, those components. So the fact sheets build this web page. And then it may also have a fact sheet if you go above to the far top right. So you can also print out that fact sheet. So there's some fact sheets that are very pretty and well done that can be, you know, distributed to conferences or whatnot. But not all the fact sheets were developed for all the species.
Okay.
So
We want to go to the.
yeah, so now let's go to the document. So I just explained kind of some of those. So there's the fact sheets that are listed there that are handouts. There are the fact sheets that build the watch list. And then there's the pest risk assessment. So if you can look at the pest risk assessment, which is the last one. Example.
This one?
Not last, all the way down.
Oh, this one.
There you go. So this is a pest risk assessment. This is the newer format, which was developed in 2009. So in 1999, there was one format. 2009, there was another format. This is the latest format. I do believe that we should update this pest risk assessment. We've always wanted to. Now that there's a formal committee, maybe we can. So you can see the person filling out the form is generally that person who's vested into that particular species. So Ann Bowe was my former cohort or person that I took the position of. So she developed that. It's very intense. It takes about 40 hours to develop one of these pest risk assessments. And of course, that's after you've done a fact sheet, because you have to initially get that information together for the committee to kind of review, and then we all decide on, okay, let's develop a pest risk assessment, and that person takes that responsibility on. It's about, I would say, 60 hours to do all of this.
Per plant species,
plant
okay.
species. So, so yeah, it's pretty involved. Once that person develops the pest risk assessment and brings it forth to the committee members, we discuss it. Some of us may have information about it to add to that, so then it kind of goes under the committee's review process, so we can all add to it. And then we discuss it, whether we should, add it to the noxious weed list. And so then I wanted, since I probably have not a lot of time, I wanted to review our vision. So this process was figured out. So Stephanie, you're talking about what's the flow. So we developed the flow. We also developed a vision and mission for the ad hoc committee, because we were really just education outreach into providing information about these invasive plants and the watch list species. And so the first role, it develops, or we designated the roles, defined the roles of what we did, so that it's there. And then how do we address this? People are asking questions about these invasive species. So how and who are the ones that share this information? So it's listed there on how we respond to public inquiries and also how we make recommendations. So first is to identify the plant and the species of concern. The members complete the research, bring it to the group. We prioritize the needs. If there's a concern, then it's noted in meeting minutes, yada, yada. I don't want to have to read through all this. Once the PRA is complete, there's an internal list, the watch list, the quarantine list. Developing the fact sheets is the next, so you're not off the hook after you do the PRA. What is the context with the public? Who's going to develop those public fact sheets? And then who's going to also discuss with the public about the treatment? We got questions all the time. Well, how do I deal with this? Who's, what state agency is going to be the regulatory person for those treatment practices? For aquatic nuisance control, that's me. For others, that may be the Agency of Ag. Animals kind of fall off the list, especially the aquatic animals. We've been taking that on because it's under our jurisdiction, but we don't have any enforcement ability under Vermont DC. So we work with wardens from Fish and Wildlife for dealing with animals. So that's it in
That's
a
awesome.
really
Thank
quick
you.
nutshell.
Thank you. Again, just highlighting the scope of work that has already been created. I also just don't want to ignore the fact that there are already 3 PRAs, I believe, that are already filled out and ready for committee, presentation at some point. Since this is a kind of organizational meeting, we have a lot of stuff to organize. It'll be for the next one. But just so that it doesn't get forgotten, there are PRAs that have been completed and ready for review. Yeah, with that, it's 10:45. We're going to have a 5-minute break. I bought 50 munchkins. Okay, a couple of, there's coffee.
Snack bar out
Please
there,
take them.
too.
Yeah, just please, so that we don't need to take it back. And we'll adjourn at 10:50, and Steve's gonna lead the discussion. Reconvene.
Not readjourn.
Okay, reconvene. Thank you for that. Does that work for everybody virtually? Are you all set there? Okay, we'll see you in 5.
I don't have a working on it. Give it a go. Excuse me, my hot spot.
Thank you so much. Good.
Yeah, so then I looked at the list and I'm like, oh. Thanks for coming. Your contributions are great. So
I find it very interesting.
it is interesting.
We also treat.
Idea.
Yeah, great to hear. Yeah, I mean, that's working too.
Yeah. Well, we're point out that on the list.
You run a.
You're also the-
I was.
I'm sorry, not.
No, it's okay. Yeah, out of context, yes. Out of context, I have a hard time with it. Yeah.
Right.
So are you starting to get really super busy? Gearing up?
We really.
Right, yeah, right.
You said somebody left?
It still was a-
Yeah, wow, that's.
Was that?
Yeah.
Wow, wow.
I don't know. I think he's always been trying to start.
On the show on
dating
that.
landscape company, and
That's why that-
really was the native alternative. Yeah.
Wow, that's a huge.
That's always that first question.
Does that affect you at all? Do you get to move up?
I was just gonna talk about the fact that we're at this table, set it up. So honestly, will do my best.
Yeah. Well, it's hard. And then you got the owner, management.
I have a specific last question for you. Have you seen or heard of Hammerhead Flatworm?
Areas.
We don't have a positive idea yet.
Send-
Yeah, but we don't have, but we don't know yet. We only have a picture and we never saw it. And I thought you had to have an actual specimen.
I guess, because.
I don't like.
Yeah.
And then we're gonna
You
go.
know, I mean,
Oh, you should draft it.
I guess just like.
There's no boundaries.
Yeah.
This whole process is what I'm talking about. I'm just measuring the same. So business side.
one thing is to look at naturalists, because that's what we do. A naturalist has a bunch of records, and they have a process for verifying. I mean, you don't.
It was 100% the Hammerhead. The way it moves,
I
the
know.
way that front head kind of expands as it moves around.
In fact, I only, we could have a specimen.
Yeah.
And I'll try to,
In the seven,
Yeah.
get over.
Now, it's been for
You
years.
should get, well, if you find one, stick it in alcohol.
So that particular specimen both came from a special 2 gallon laboratory from Pride. We went out communication with them. Just for my own information.
Maybe some logistics.
That's the business side of it.
I mean, that would be really helpful.
There was an anonymous way to do that.
I'm an anonymous way.
I should say this out of earshot of Steph, but always ask an anonymous tip. You can just say, look, I found this. I don't want them to know. And I can simply contact the ethics bureau and say, we had a verified report of this problem showing up. Can you make sure they're.
Yeah, you just, you trace back.
Yeah.
But you would would have to get the bring it back though. Like, so you would have to go.
Well, I could also do it informally, like speak out with me and say, you're hearing from nurseries.
Make a recommendation to the agency.
Yeah, there is, informally, because we don't regulate this.
Yeah.
But
Well,
I
I'm
can
thinking
just
the
contact the state and say, we're doing these things. And you have to
But it's also gonna contribute that trickle down effect. You have the largest New England producer,
Right.
distributor, that then passes it on to a smaller distributor.
And
Wants to recommend something.
You know, what is, I know it's very difficult to cross state lines, but like, what is the state of Connecticut doing to help prevent the spread of this?
And they might not.
And then the
regulate
breeding
it.
of stuff that
Because, you know, our plants are grown in the mat,
it's just,
and the information.
Yep.
yeah.
So if that were everybody to get into the propagation side of things, and
That's why
then
we
we're
regulate
starting
the
to
nursery.
produce it, yeah.
That's why we have this whole system, but you know, the thing is that worm isn't regulated, so.
There's no.
Right,
Yeah,
but,
it's not.
but there are
Okay.
a lot of informal things we can do, and so that's where.
Thank you so much.
Oh, yeah, good one.
We have the environmental complaint.
Is that
Thank you.
one?
I'm really, you're.
Yeah, we don't have.
Oh, by the way.
The only thing that's required is the
I
social
know,
file
there's
and
some
whatever
snow
it is.
stone.
Yeah.
But you know,
So that would.
who I inspired to start.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know, Ben, I might have to drag you down when we go metal detecting it. I talk about Steve, I was like, oh my
You
God,
realize how suspicious
this
that
place where it would be really fun to.
Right, I mean, it's on the road, as a company, and then you show up next week, and it's like.
No, I don't need to show up. You
We're
know.
talking about metal
You can
detecting.
really say-
I retreated from my road from my house.
My brother and
Is
I.
this on the same lines too for the jumping worm or the outside where it's like working on that?
Oh, yeah.
There's so much of it. And then in-ground plants, somebody else for the first one.
That stuff gets me so excited. Oh, God. I found a set, like a 1700, but.
I know what this is.
Like, was, yeah, Rhode Island. It was really dry here and I had it there for all the days. It was from the but it was this stuff in the bottom of the stream. Completely intact. Caroline Thrasher.
We don't have.
Well, they have,
Okay.
providing support to states,
Yeah.
they just don't want to get.
Oh.
It's hard.
Only round tables like this.
But then the other thing is, he's out, so we can't start until he's the one like leading this discussion, so we have time. When he was down in Florida, he was telling me, you know, they have all these sinkholes and these caves, underground caves. So some spelunkers came to his property down in Florida and said, there's a cave opening, can you go down? And, you know, he granted them access. And way down in this underground cavern, they found this old
Reduces the
American wool that was used in ceremonial, like, I think it was
like, it's like a farm to like.
anyway, so the spelunkers were actually
And of course, when I found it.
integrity to come up and they gave it to him and said, hey, you can research this on your property. So he has that and he brought it up to Vermont with him, so I can't wait to see it. But, like, that is tens of thousands, or at least thousands of years.
Welcome.
Isn't that cool?
It's kind of buried since 1995, but feel free to email.
What?
Well, we like swear that artifact.
Oh, yeah, well, that, and probably not like that case, but, if you wanna be really. But I would have a hard time letting that go too. It's like the connection to history.
Oh, out of our park, so it's.
And I don't know really about this, and like the worker. I think that's the proper way to do it.
Yeah, but
I think what
more or
the
less
challenges are is like you fight against that human desire to attach and touch and like connect with the past, really. That's what I like touching it, and I'm like, yes, like somebody made this in their hands, and they're no longer here, but it's here. You know, it's just like, it's kind of like it.
for others, like the
What, the crock pot? It did, yeah. It's not like, so, you know, I'm just as guilty. I removed it. I just, in my heart, I was like, I am not leaving it in this stream when nobody else is. But I think archaeological purists are like, do not touch it. I think so.
Yeah, I mean, to the extent that you can like bake it, yes, spread it, you know, like on, or have like an interview.
It's a new thing apparently, yeah. I started in COVID because I was just like,
You know, that would be.
it was an interesting one, but like the Winooski.
But it's an additional
know me pretty well, because I was in the medians, you know, and there's that weirdo, like, everybody else is inside, and there's this person in a metal detector with a shovel in the middle of the Winooski. No, the weirdest, I know. And you well, you know what, for that one, I found a penny from like the 1920s. That was nice.
Yeah, I'm like finding a place.
I know, and that's gonna be
We're a
great.
company that they have willing to
To
do
do
that.
that. Because we.
And that program was started by Ralph.
All right, folks, all right, let's get settled back in. I can tell you.
We talk about I have no idea that it was. I was trying to get better.
It does beg the question of like number type of person. Yes, we usually divide. So,
All right, Elizabeth, I see your comment and I will make sure to read it out to the group when we're all seated.
Yeah.
Munchkins are keeping people out.
Sorry, I mean, you go.
No sugar, so.
Haven't had a month.
No.
Well, you know, when I started off with 26 and then and now it's like, no, 50. And then I was like, do I need to choose like how many of each? And they make it easy. They're like, do you want assorted or do you want to pick it? It's like assorted, please.
You could make a Munchkin watch list.
Not much on watch list, absolutely. That's great.
Sorry, honey.
Okay, so I just wanted to, Elizabeth, just put in the chat, here, so everybody hears it. For the 11 species that received updated fact sheets in 2019, their treatment information listed on website gallery pages was updated in 2022. But it takes a lot of work, I guess, and, grant funding is always limited, so they were only able to make those 11 updates. And there are a lot more that need to be done. So, thanks, Elizabeth. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to my director, who is going to lead the discussion now.
Yeah, and what we want to talk about now is how the committee will actually function when, you know, in the process of developing the recommendation for the secretary for the rule change. Okay, so, and we've been talking about it internally, and I think the simplest structure is the easiest, rather than make it real elaborate. The simple description is that basically the committee members just have to show up at the meeting and review the recommendations and discuss it and then state a position. I mean, we'll vote, quote unquote, but it's not really going to be a situation where, well, let me rephrase that. It's more important for each representative to state what their position is on the recommendation as opposed to counting up the votes, if that makes any sense. Because ultimately, the secretary is going to make the decision about whether it gets on the list or not. And then we'll go through the rulemaking process. So there'll be a lot of opportunity for comment there. But what's important for the secretary's consideration is what the committee members thought about the recommendation. That's what he'll want to know, or any secretary will want to know. So the process is pretty simple. Any committee member can bring a plant to the committee and say, we need to consider this one. And obviously, if we already have the PRAs done, those will be the first ones to be considered. And then, you know, we go through the process. If the PRA is already there, then we discuss it. Committee members state what their recommendation is to the secretary. We're done with that one. If there are other issues associated with, like, you know, how to control it, what information needs to go out to the public, that can be added on during the discussion But there's no obligation on any particular agency or entity that's represented to do anything. You retain your own authority and your own ability to do whatever you do. Any information that's provided as far as what needs to happen is just information that's provided to the committee members to do with it what you will. The committee can't say, FPR, you need to do this. We can say, the committee members can say, it'd be really great if FPR did this, but we can't direct or obligate or anything, if that makes sense. So it's a pretty straightforward process. My recommendation would be, that we really don't even have a structure in terms of chair or vice chair or anything like that, because you don't need it, because the agency has the obligation to keep the meeting together. I mean, it's our job to convene the meetings, to set the agenda with the input from the members, to, facilitate the meeting, make all the recordings, keep all the records, put everything on the website. That's all the agency's responsibility now. And so, in the past, the committee had to have a structure to make sure things happened. Now the agency has to make sure things happen. And then the committee members, opportunity is to come in and, comment on what the recommendations are going to be and provide information, and then that gets passed on to the secretary. So does that make sense? I mean, does anybody have any questions about that process?
One question.
Mhm.
So that doesn't say who does the work. Are you getting, I assume you're going to get to that part?
What?
The best recommendation, the PRAs.
Okay, so yeah,
Best risk
oh, yeah,
assessments.
you're right. So, yeah, so then if you have a, say a committee member brings forward a plan and that PRA has to be done, then somebody's going to have to volunteer to do the PRA, or a group will have to volunteer to do the PRA. In some cases, the agency we may be able to do part of it, or some combination of agencies may be able to do part of it. But again, there's no authority to direct anybody to do anything. So the ideal situation is if somebody brings a plan and it's discussed and people are concerned about it, the various organizations represented, someone will pick up a part of it and work on it. Does that make sense? It's pretty much a voluntary thing.
But yeah, I think there's two things that we have to figure out. That is, you just mentioned the statutory authority and the main focus of this committee. But then there's all the other work that's behind that,
right,
that we have to decide how, as committee members, we're going to participate in that process.
Right.
And I think that's beyond what the statute is. So,
Yeah.
I think the Agency of Ag has a role. And then all of these members that are sitting around the table and they're online then have to understand who's responsible for it. And so that's the information and education piece, which is very imperative to this. So who's going to post things and where are they going to be posted? Are we going to continue with the VTinvasives.org as a vehicle to get that messaging across? So that's one component, the education outreach. Who's going to respond to the new listings? Is that if I get a call about swallowwort or something, am I going to say talk to the Agency of Ag? So those are those responsibilities that I'd like to kind of define. And then treatment, who's going to oversee or inform the public and or nursery managers about treatment of these species that therefore have been listed. So there's that other, components that's huge, a huge responsibility.
Right.
And then finally, enforcement. So we haven't even opened up that can of worms yet. So the Agency of Ag has the enforcement abilities, and game wardens and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and APHIS have enforcement, but often those people are not able to go and enforce these issues. So those are some four components that I'd like to figure out, like how we're gonna be moving forward.
Well, the simple answer is we'll do it on a case-by-case basis. You know, once we've decided that, again, the committee's sole responsibility is to decide what goes on that list, right?
Mhm.
So once a plant has been put on that list, then, you know, those four things can be considered by the committee. And then each agency and organization retains their own authority and, you know, freedom of action. So if you know, we will discuss it as a committee, what needs to happen here. And, you know, DEC say, well, we have the authority to do the aquatic weed, so we're going to go do that. Or Forest Park, they say, well, this is on our property, so we're going to go do that. I think, you know, we will maintain a website for the purposes of this committee and for the agency. And so some of that information will be there. And whatever, and when it comes to nurseries, obviously we have the enforcement authority and they can be integrated into the existing programs or augmented or whatever. But you know, basically we're going to have to decide on a case-by-case basis what we're going to do. You know, as you pointed out, there's nothing in the statute that says this agency's going to do this, this agency's going to do that. So it's whatever the agencies decide to do by agreement as a result of the, you know, putting that or identifying that particular issue.
And then what about all the species that are not forthcoming? I mean, there's a list of species that still need information, still need that kind of processing. So it's
Same deal. We're going to have to, you know, people are going to have to volunteer to do it and agree on doing things. And, you know, I mean, there's no authority. There's, you know, so at some point, for example, well, let me just ask this question before I say that. So the VT invasives is maintained by who?
Vermont DEC, UVM, and Forest Parks Rec. I
Okay.
think, I'm not sure if Forest Parks Rec actually pays for
The
it. but
UCF program is interested, like Elizabeth, actually, would you be able to answer this for us, Elizabeth?
I can try. Gwen is probably the best person to answer the intricacies. My understanding is that the UVM extension and the Agency of Natural Resources are financially obligated, well, not obligated, but are financial supporters of keeping VTinvasives.org going. And there is a very small subset of staff that it's basically a labor of love to keep the information current and updated as best as we can. And we would certainly love to make this a resource that is more collaborative, more people at the table. I was just looking at the Google Analytics for the website, and just between November 2021 and November 2022, there were 95,000 unique visitors to the website, 15,000 of which were from Vermont and 23,000 of which were from overseas. So it does seem to be used and is potentially a great resource for a lot of the things that are being discussed.
Right. So the reason I asked that question was that at some point the committee could make a recommendation to the various agencies represented that funding for that increase, you know. But again, each agency is going to have, nobody's giving up any authority or assuming any obligation by being on this committee, other than making a recommendation to the secretary.
Yeah.
So my question has to do with more about the methodology for selecting plants to review. Noting that these risk assessments take so long, right? So, I mean, is there a way to kind of quickly cross-reference what's actually being sold and distributed? And then I think Toby brought up some good points that, you know, there's other considerations, whether, you know, other than whether something's invasive or not, whether it's going to be really worth the committee's time to investigate. And I think I haven't seen it, but it might be good as part of our process to kind of write out those objectives and see, you know, how we might best utilize the time that we have, noting that it's limited.
Yeah, the pest risk assessment question those parameters of whether it's invasive, where is it invasive? So it kind of populates that information.
I think we primarily looked at, I mean, I think we identified species, right? And then I think we looked at the ones that we knew were being sold and looked at, those were prioritized over something we, felt like we could never get a handle on anyway.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like a real formal process or anything.
I have a question just about the regional approach, because obviously, it was introduced, New York has a solid program around this, Maine does. So presumably there are PRAs that other states have done on some of these other plants that may be on our watch list. What has any ideas around bringing in foundational PRA materials so that much of the work is already done by sources that are valid and vetted, and so this committee doesn't need to go through the entire process all over again, because regionally you could argue that that information is applicable to Vermont.
Yeah, we always included other PRAs
Okay.
into the Vermont PRA.
And we get permission to use information from New York State.
Okay.
So there was a contractor from Vermont who did a lot of the PRAs for New York, and he got permission to make them available to us. I
Okay.
mean, obviously, the information isn't going to be directly transferable because some of the fields there are, the impact in Vermont and where it occurs in Vermont, which the New York PRA isn't going to necessarily help us, but some of the, the broader information by all means could be useful.
And then I'm also involved in the climate change RISCC that you were present at. So we look at the regional species that are coming. And then also that organization did a comparative analysis of all the other risk assessments in the region. So we have those available to us as well. I was wondering if you could turn on the comments so we could see how others are commenting.
I get to talk. I'm seeing a really awesome opportunity coupling conservation service, working with state botanists on PRAs to have a alternative native plant recommendation. So often in nurseries, we have people coming in all the time that ask for barberry. And it's our job as a salesperson to recommend something that as an alternative, but if the state were to create a native species list for recommendations.
We have lists like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's various iterations of it, but
Yeah.
give me your email and I can send you some.
Vermont invasives, like the fact sheets.
Yeah, like you have a column of native species that would be a good alternative.
Right, you got to be careful. I mean, some of the Xerces Society and the Audubon one, I think they're all native to the US, but some of them are like, Midwestern prairie species, and it's like.
Yeah, that's why we need
Plant that, but it's not our preference, but I'm sorry.
That's why we need a Vermont-based expertise on making a recommendation of something that does grow in our environment, that has a similar size, similar environment, similar fall foliage, similar flower. I don't know, there's all those different aspects that could help accumulate into a suggestive option.
Maybe this is opening a can of worms, but even, species native to Vermont that you get from nurseries, you don't know the original provenance of that.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I was told by a researcher from UVM who wants to plant white oak and hickory that the nearest seed source for that was Illinois and Michigan. And I was incredulous, and he said there are no nurseries that are, selling material from Vermont. I mean, he had to go that far.
So this is an example of what can happen in a committee where we're sharing, it's perfect, where we can share information and, so then you can go off and do some stuff with the industry and, we share information and it's a great function for the committee. But this, but that's sort of ancillary to the purpose of what we need to be doing at a meeting, which is great, and we can build that in. But I think obviously we have the advantage of all the work that's already been done, from the, committee in the past. And we want to build on that, but we need to focus it to get into where we need to be on these specific rule recommendations. And I think there's a path forward on that. One thing is we already have 3 PRAs. So the next task for the group is to consider those and decide if those should be put into rule. The second thing is there are other candidates out there. There's a lot of them. We could, people could volunteer to be on a work group to select the candidates to bring to the next meeting. Whoever wants to participate, and that can go off and kick it around and come back and say, here's the next 5 or 6 or 7 that we need to work on. And then that would be, a recommendation from the committee that these are the ones who work on it, everybody agrees, and then we split up the work and people go off and work on them. So I think that's how we can go forward. I think one of the 2 things that we need to decide are the process for establishing the agenda and how frequently we're going to meet. Okay. It appears to me, just on the face of it, that there's a lot of work. And so, I think we were talking about twice a year meetings. I don't think that's going to be enough. I think we're probably talking about at least a quarterly meeting for the first year anyway, till we get the ball rolling. And then as far as establishing the agenda for the meeting, I think the way for that to work is that we will send a proposed agenda to all the committee members and people can comment on it if you want to add something to it or, whatever. And then we'll publish an agenda, well in advance of the meeting. And then we'll just, convene the meetings and conduct the meetings, and the recommendations to the agency will emerge, and the information sharing and the recommendations to the participating organizations will emerge, And I think that's pretty much it.
Steve, just one other suggestion, those 3 existing PRAs, those should be looked at and probably updated because they were probably done 3, 4, 5 years ago. Probably the problem's gotten worse. It hasn't gotten better, so.
Well, one
Good to update them, I would think.
I mean,
At least have somebody look at them.
and Ben and Judy, tell me if I'm speaking out of turn, but could we look at those 3 PRAs in preparation for the next meeting to see if they need updating? Or do we need expertise from the community?
I'm not comfortable. I don't think I have enough
Do you know what the
expertise.
3 species are?
Yeah, do you know them offhand?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay, no, it's fine. I think we have them in.
I could take one. I'm willing to.
But then you can take all of them.
I think one of them was mine.
All right, let's see.
I'm not gonna do it twice. That's all I can do.
Do we have?
It was in the email.
Oh, it was in, okay, got it. All right, I'm gonna just
The agencies
get
think we
that.
should do it in 4 days or something like that. We'll just consider it. Yeah, he's gonna want to know. Yes. He's not gonna care.
So while Emily is looking up those, I wanted to mention, Steve, that we had, a structural component of the meeting. So it's like procedures, rules, kind of the business part of the meeting. And then we had another section of the meeting that was like, okay, let's open up the floor about the pest risk assessments and these species that we're working on. So it was like the work group meeting.
Right.
So therefore.
Yeah, but so you don't need the structural component anymore because you don't need to maintain the activity of the organization. We're doing that. That's done. You don't have to worry about when your next meeting is. You don't have to worry about where the minutes are. You don't have to worry about any of that because we're taking care of all that.
I think some things will come up though, still, it's like, even though it's not statutory, it's still committee members building capacity. So maps, like who's, those kind of questions, funding, there's all sorts of other questions that are not about the species. It's more about the capacity for this group to continue and to also understand the many different dimensions of what it takes to be this committee and how we can increase the capacity for this group. Because it can't all just be volunteer. It has to be some way forward to have more structure to the committee so we can better inform the public. And that's the gap that's been missing because we've been ad hoc. So, that's something I'd like to, just kind of put out there that there needs to be some sort of structure and we don't have that.
Well, okay, so my argument would be is you do. Because the purpose of the committee is to make a recommendation. The agency's providing the structure.
Mhm.
We convene the meeting, we maintain the minutes. We circulate the agenda. We provide the website. So basically you have the structure now. So there's no capacity that needs to be developed. There's capacity within each individual organization that may need to be developed. But that's not this committee's responsibility. It's the responsibility of each individual organization. You can share information about how to do that, but the committee doesn't provide funding. The committee doesn't establish capacity, if that makes any sense. The committee's job is to come together, consider the pests that need to be on the list, and make a recommendation. That's it. There's an opportunity to share information independent of that. And we'll build that into the agenda. But the committee has one job. And there's things that can come out of that. But there is no need for the committee to develop any funding or capacity or anything, because it has one job to do, and we're providing the structure for that to happen, if that makes any sense.
I think one of the things that kind of resonated with me about what you said is that it seems like, given the list of plants and the length of time of the process, the structure of this group is going to determine how many we can realistically assess. And so there may be either some methodology that is outside that, like 40-hour kind of per plant method, that allows us to more holistically look at the list. That might be something that's valuable. I think that noting the length of time, it seems like how many PRAs could we get through in a year, meeting quarterly? Probably not that many.
Yeah, I think there's the capacity, and I understand what you're saying, Steve, that this is the agency's statutory responsibility. I guess I just can't address it enough that there's other responsibilities that are not being covered by anyone because we don't have the capacity to do so. We don't have the responsibility under statute. None of us do. We don't. So that's what I mean by how can this committee move forward some of these needs, such as an early detection rapid response plan. Who's responsible for that in Vermont? We've all talked about it in the past that we'd like one. Whose responsibility is for it? We have one in Lake Champlain Basin for aquatic nuisances. I'm going to develop one for the state, but what about the other species? What's that plan?
Be a recommendation.
Yeah, it can certainly be a
I think
recommendation.
that's what we have to do.
Yes, it can be a recommendation.
We're not going to solve that problem.
Yeah, it can be a recommendation. We can discuss it and say, hey, something needs to happen. Here's some ideas about it. And it can be, and if there's a recommendation, it's going to be to the organizations represented on the committee.
Yes.
But we can't. Well, I mean, that's what can happen.
Yes. So that's what I'm saying is there should be a business meeting, like an organizational part of the meeting too, to talk about those challenges. They will arise, and it would be helpful to be able to.
I hope you understand, or everybody here understands, the importance for having an early detection rapid response plan and be able to implement that. I mean, the species that we add to the quarantine list are already here. It's essentially closing the barn door after all the animals are gone. It's like, okay, they're out there. Early detection is our opportunity to stop something when it first gets into the state before it becomes widespread. And talk about bang for your bucks. I mean, that's the way to actually, prevention. There will be a list developed probably this fall that the Native Plant Trust is doing, looking at early detection species in northern New England. So it's looking at the 3 northern New England states of species that should be early detection that are not here yet or just beginning to come here from the south typically. So they're looking at species that are problematic in Massachusetts and Connecticut, and with climate change and, you know, people traveling and whatnot, propane deliveries are moving farther north. And that's the list we should focus on, things that are not here yet, and do something to be monitoring for them and eradicating them as soon as they show up.
How does that work into the watch list? Is that similar, or is this before the watch list? Like in that flow? Is this other list from the
Yeah.
native plant community?
I would think anything on the early detection list would be candidates to be on the watch list for sure.
Yeah.
Because they're things that we know are a problem in southern New England, and they're gonna be a problem if and when they arrive here.
Why aren't they on the watch list?
Aren't a lot of them already there?
I'm sorry, why aren't they on the watch list? Because nothing has been added to the watch list in, what, 3 to 5 years since this committee has been kind of defunct.
Since the rule was changed last in 2014.
Yeah, so
So should that be a point for the next meeting to try to get the watch list updated?
I think.
this list, other lists.
Well, so this is part of the problem. So, I mean, the committee has one job, okay? But there's all these other things that need to happen.
Right.
And what we have to be careful about, you know, certainly I understand everything you're saying and it's important, but we can't go off in a million different directions and not do what we're supposed to do.
Right.
So maybe one way to do it is, you know, have the meeting set up so you focus on the initial job first. And once you're done, then we take a break and you come back and you talk about all the other things that need to happen.
And we
just-
develop a white paper.
Yeah, or
something.
whatever. I mean, yeah, but it's not, again, we have to do what we're supposed to do because that's not what, it hasn't happened, you know, since what, 2014? I mean, that's the problem. So we need to get done what we're supposed to get done. And then we can, if we can get anything else done, that's fantastic. But we need to get done what we need to get done first instead of getting scattered. Anyway.
Yeah, and so that's why, you know, we developed that listing so we can see what's the direction for it. How can we get all of the species that are coming on the watch list and develop the pest risk assessment? So there's that flow.
Yeah, I just want to also just chime in with Mike here. He says, I think we're talking about planning followed by implementation. This committee is not really about implementation, correct? And those performing the implementation are many and widespread, but then we need to ask about monitoring of our project implementations.
So one possibility is, because the other thing we have to be aware of is that this is an advisory committee to the Department of Agriculture, or the Agency of Agriculture, right, to the Secretary. So it's a public meeting with everything, you know, has to be noticed. So what we, you know, all these other things that need to be done, potentially we can convene the meeting, do the business, and then we adjourn. But if people want to stay and talk about all this other stuff, great. It's just not a public meeting anymore. Now it's a work group trying to figure out what the heck to do about all the species that are showing up in Vermont. And, you know, that could be a whole separate function that's not part of the public meeting. And that we don't have to, you know, it's just an opportunity. Hey, we're all here. Let's talk about this, you know, and then you can do whatever else we need to do.
Right, but wait, are we still official then? Because that's.
No.
Is that the VIEPAC versus the PAC?
You can do that. I mean, you can do whatever you want, you know, as long as we do what we're supposed to do.
Yeah, I guess you know, since this is now a formal committee, you know, we talked about having a scientific advisory committee potentially that is the work group of the committee. It's just not the formal.
It still would be required to meet the open meeting law because it's any committee created in rule and any subcommittee of those committees. So it just compounds the committeeiness.
Yeah.
The open meeting law. But that's not, I'm not saying you wouldn't want to do it. I'm just saying that that's.
Because the committee members can come back to the next meeting and say, hey, by the way.
We just happen to be talking about.
Well, you're gonna, I mean, like I said, I keep saying this, you're not giving up any authority or you're not gaining any obligations by coming to this. Okay, the only obligation is to make a recommendation to the secretary. That's it. That's the only obligation. By being appointed a member is to do that.
You're also under no obligation to fill out a pest risk assessment.
Right.
Yeah.
I was like, the process could be.
Wait, I thought that the statute stuff does, I mean, it doesn't say PRA, but it does have a list of criteria you have to.
I mean, the committee members are not required to, it's all voluntary,
Right.
is what we're talking about, right?
So one way around this, based on Steve's, I should say Steve D's structure, since there are other Steves here, is that could we have subcommittees that could work on developing we have to do the recommendations for the weeds nominated to the noxious weed list, but Steve D was saying we could also make other recommendations. Can we have subcommittees who work on that? Smaller groups that come up with a recommendation they bring to the big committee to.
They would still have to be public.
Yeah, so that means that we would have to be doing all the administrative support for every single subcommittee.
I see.
And we don't have because there are 3 of us. And I think that is an honest to God resource limitation.
There's a model for that with the Endangered Species Committee. They have scientific advisory groups for each taxonomic group. They are not public meetings. There's no staffing involved. They're all it's voluntary, and then they feed recommendations into the Endangered Species Committee, whose meetings are public. So our lawyers have vetted this and said, okay, your meetings do not have to be publicly warned. So you folks are operating under a different model or a different paradigm.
In the National Park Service, we have advisory groups all the time that are put on by us that are based on advising the park, but invasive species is a ubiquitous thing. So I think there's a lot of opportunities outside of this to organize meetings, and it doesn't necessarily all need to go through the state. We could play a role in gathering people and having these discussions that might inform our other work.
Mm-hmm. And that would be totally up to.
But I think what we can do is whenever we have a meeting, we'll block the room for hours after the meeting, and you guys, then everybody can talk about whatever, But all I'm saying is what we're proposing is a pretty simple structure to get done what we're supposed to get done. And then provide an opportunity for all kinds of other interactions. And like you said, it's the VIEPAC, and then the meeting's over, and then you guys dust off the old one and start talking about the other committee. I mean, you can do that. I mean, it's fine. Because that committee emerged, I assume, out of the need to coordinate activities and was very productive and, useful. And there's no reason this committee needs to make that committee go away. It's just a different group of people, different group of agencies getting together to do something.
Can you please put that in notes?
With the history. I actually, there are a couple points here. I just want to, Kathy Decker has a question. How does the committee help AG oversee and enforce the quarantine? What is AG's approach to EDRR? Just some questions here.
Emily, what's our approach to EDRR?
Thanks, Kathy.
Yeah, and it wasn't meant to be like a jab. It was more like you were all talking about what do we do, and I get it. Like my dog's gonna go crazy. I get it. That it might not be in the realm of what we are tasked to do through the rule, but we're obviously all here for a reason. It's because it's important to us. We do that work. And I think we're all here to say, like, how do we cooperate and how do we build something instead of I don't know, I just feel like we're trying to do good work. Yes, we can say we can only do this in this committee, but this committee are the people who really care in the state and who are doing something. And it would be wise to utilize us to expand what's going on with the quarantine and what that means and what we're trying to do. That's what I was trying to get at is we do need an EDRR approach. Maybe it doesn't fit into this rule piece, but the reality is, again, I've heard the word enforcement several times, and that's what I'm asking is, well, how does it get enforced? Who's enforcing it? And I know capacity is an issue for all of us, but if we worked together, we'd have collective capacity, perhaps.
Well, and that can be, so when the committee makes a recommendation on a product plant to be on the noxious weed list, then formally the work is done, right? The committee has met its, but there obviously be discussion around what does that mean, how we're going to implement it. And that could be part of the committee discussion is, okay, we really think Ben needs to get out there and check every nursery. And, we want you to do it right away. But beyond that, we can have discussions about that. But again, every agency is going to have to decide what their capacity is to do something. But I do think there's some value to, once the committee's done what it's supposed to do, taking the opportunity, since we're all here talking about it, to talk about the EDRR, but not as part of the committee. It's just, hey, we're here, let's talk about the EDRR. And some ideas may emerge, and if something useful comes out of it that the committee can do something with at the next meeting, you bring that to the next meeting. So basically have a two-part meeting, a public meeting, do the work, take a break, come back, and then talk about whatever is.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And just a little bit to, like, that feeds into that idea here. Elizabeth asks us, Agency of Ag, do we have any funding potential for contracting some of the PRA work? And that is a model that other states have done. To answer your question, no, right now we do not have any money. But again, and that it wouldn't be the committee's role, but there wouldn't be anything prohibiting that next meeting, the group, to discuss like what kinds of opportunities are there to maybe get money to do PRA stuff.
And what could happen is after we've done this for a while, and it's just obvious that we need it, we could put in a budget request and see what happens as an agency, and or another agency could do that, and see what happens. We can always ask. But again, I just want to make sure we do what we're supposed to do and do it as efficiently as possible, take care of, not scatter and do all. I mean, this committee is not going to solve the invasive species problem in the state of Vermont. It'd be great if we could, but but if we get the ball rolling on getting things added, it will inform the activity of our plant health group for sure. I think everyone that's in that group has got the message. There's some things we need to do, and we'll do them. And that information will get back. And other agencies probably get the same, will get the same, there will be things that come up that are done that'll inform what you guys do in your individual agencies or organizations, and so it'll get better. We'll have some positive outcomes from it.
So wanted to highlight on the enforcement question. We have a rule that we are at the agency are responsible for enforcing. So we do enforce, and Ben gave examples of going out onto nurseries and finding a species on the list and encouraging that individual to manage it appropriately. So we do have that authority. We'd also like to work really well with VTrans with respect to management activities in land controlled by VTrans to ensure that there isn't spread. So, we have lots of opportunities to cooperate outside of this group. And we're there, we're ready.
We got to, that's for sure. So can I just do a quick summary from where we're at right now? So what I'm hearing is quarterly meetings is what we landed on. Is there any discussion or concerns around that? It's 4 times a year, at least for the first year. Nothing's set in stone. We can always change. But
yeah, that would be the regular meetings.
Regular meetings.
Public body, and then there's an opportunity to have special meetings and the law outlines when you're.
Yeah, so we would do that formal public meeting right here, for a couple hours, 2-3 hours, and then with the acknowledgement that this room will be held for the rest of the day, and we can set up other working group meetings as it relates to anything else that people want to bring up.
There's agencies that want to talk to each other.
Agencies that want to talk to each other, yes.
And are not talking about the business of the committee.
Right.
No. Does that work? And are there any issues with that or comments that people want to bring up?
I think that those recommendations, as you're saying, like the committee members, that's their formal charge, if you will, to provide recommendations to the Agency of Ag, how to manage the list and then the responsibilities that come with that list. So that seems like a really good definition. And then this work group that's not part of, we have your blessing to continue as the ad hoc committee potential.
That have the permission of their supervisors to not go back to work. To work on things that are not the business of this committee.
Yep.
And
Yeah. So actually, so the work product of the committee will be, here's the products that need to be, or the pesticides. Here are the plants that need to be on the list. Here are some recommendations about how to implement that. And then that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
And then, you know.
And then
But-
we go through the rulemaking process,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
agency, that's our responsibility.
Right,
Again, like
and-
from the structural standpoint, and then do the outreach regarding those pests. That's.
And
our
my intention is to get the rulemaking started as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as soon as the committee said, this is the recommendation, I will take it to the secretary, and then he'll say, okay, and then bang, we're off to the races.
I get the back end where we're talking about the PRAs and everything, but there's a lot of that upfront stuff that I'm having a little trouble understanding where that line is. So we need to talk about the watch list to talk about what the next PRA is gonna be.
Right.
So that is okay to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
And look at the species and on the watch list.
Right, and so that's another, I mean, we could either do that as a committee of the whole, or we could designate a subcommittee just to look at the watch list.
Okay, so that makes sense to me. Okay.
Yeah, looking at the lists, I think, so the structure of the list is the committee's responsibility.
Yes.
So I think we can adopt that list. I think everybody from the former committee, okay, the sharing of our materials. So I think we can make that a formal list.
And we could publish it on our website.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, so.
they're public records once they're
Yeah.
given to us. I mean, they may already be because we
Maybe,
looked at them.
I think the other committee will have to create a better list that is a public facing document.
Oh, yeah, like a formal, yeah, that's not as detailed, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that other committee, so we should keep,
We just call it a group.
okay, the group,
The watch list work group.
the
Watch.
yeah. We have to come up with a fun acronym in moving forward, and I think that will better, define the processes, because there is so much work that needs to be done.
So I think we're at the point now where we could agree that we're going, what the next meeting date would be. We'll send out the agenda will be the 3 PRAs that we've.
And I apologize. I don't think it was actually 3. I actually pulled it up. Kim, do you want to just, yeah, it was. I was wrong. Hang on.
5.
I said 3 for sure.
I think that was fine.
You're right.
I remember 5 too.
Yeah.
Okay, so 5 PRAs will be the subject of the next meeting.
Please.
I think the easiest thing to do is everybody take a look at it yourself and see if it needs to be updated.
The PRAs.
Yeah, and we'll look at them too. But let's just plan on,
Get them online. But what I'll do is download these 5 PRAs then as a packet in PDF form, and then send it out to everybody as a file with everything in it.
So how do we decide if they need to be updated? Do we send all that in our thoughts to you and?
everyone just come to the next meeting, decide. if-
We'll put together all the comments and, yeah, make sure that everybody knows what everybody else is.
6 up there.
I think it's the noxious, the watch list recommendation. Was that counted as one of those? So
Yeah,
there's
so
porcelain
it's
berry, autumn, yep,
What's the A going to be?
5.
And at the committee, we're gonna.
Yeah, so four
Including the
Bs,
watch
one,
list.
yeah, I wasn't including.
Now we need to do more work.
Well, we should.
Yeah, but that's gonna be, there's gonna be a conversation, yeah.
Home glutenosis isn't up there. That has a P, doesn't it have a P on it?
Well, so these are the ones that
I was supposed to do it.
There you go. Okay, so let's decide on our next, next meeting date. Is that something that everybody is prepared to figure out right now?
We should have it sooner than later, even though I hate to say that.
Yeah, what do folks think about that?
Do we have a doodle poll?
When's your last day?
Yeah.
A going away party.
I continue to come to these meetings, but I would be a member of the public.
You would be
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Valuable.
But he, as a member of the public, can he comment during the meeting or does he have to wait?
We'll have a public comment period, but we'll have lots of breaks.
That's good.
But I can come to the non-official part of the meeting.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, hang on, Mike. I see your hand raised.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. I can agree with meeting 4 times a year. There's, the work is there. I'm looking, when I look at a full year calendar, I think of the growing seasons and I would wonder about doing, I mean, you could have 4 meetings in October, November, December. Does that make sense? Sure, because nobody has time. If like, I'm not on the clock right now, so I'm really not, it's not helpful to me to have meetings during the workday. It becomes frankly, it becomes a $400 torpedo every day that I'm not working outside. And I don't want to do that repeatedly. So I'm not going to recommend night meetings because no one's going to want to do that. But does it not make sense to meet more tilted towards the fall months leading into having a product in hand to give to the LCAR in January and say, here you go, approve this so we can move and be ready for the upcoming growing season in March, April?
Well, the LCAR meets all the time, so there's.
Does
no-
LCAR meet in the summertime?
They think they meet whenever they need to meet.
Okay.
Yeah, so in fact, there's a strategy to do it before January so that they have more time to focus on it. They're not wrapped up in the session.
Right.
So.
Mike, I want to recognize that you are one, yeah, a lot of us are on the clock right now and getting paid. So we appreciate you coming. I think, yeah, from a capacity standpoint, also, we're really busy in the summer, as I'm sure most people are here. So yeah, does it make sense to actually have it during the busiest time of the year? And I'll just open that up for, I guess, ideas.
The summer is not necessarily the busiest time of year for us. We've got usually a lag in the middle, right? So the shoulder seasons where we're hitting like spring ephemeral, or not ephemeral, spring herbaceous invasives, and then the fall when we're really targeting shrub treatments and things like that are more busy for us.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, got you.
Yeah, I think it's just, I think it's hard to get at everybody's schedule.
Yep. And Mike, I think this is maybe where we can have another, like, people aren't going to be able to make every single meeting, and that's just life. So, certain times, if it's not convenient for you, totally understand why you might not be able to make everyone also.
No, I appreciate that, Emily. I mean, no, thank you. It becomes an issue when you're trying to manage 10 meetings. Oh, you're active in more than one group, and then you get to the end of the month and you go, wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
I got to get to work.
Yeah, for sure.
So thank you.
Yeah, no, I empathize for sure. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, and you can always communicate with Emily too, if you can't come to a meeting, about what your comments are.
Mary Beth says October through April would be the best time for the Green Mountain National Forest folks.
Like not the field season.
Yep.
I'm open for whatever. Doesn't matter to me.
I think we should sort of stick to this quarterly idea and, we may find that we want to, after the first meeting, we might want to meet more often but I think we've got to I hate to delay it. I'd like to just get started a little bit. And if you can't make it, you can't make it, but.
You can still comment.
Yeah, there's only one meeting before that, and then 4 months later or 3 months later is October, right?
Yep.
So
one in June is what we're thinking, or July, and then go from there, and every 3 months for that, after that.
that would be my vote, but
Okay,
I like June.
I'd stay out of July.
okay. Not everybody's gonna be happy, clearly. Darn it.
it's 3 months from March, whatever.
It'll be June, the end of
Yeah.
June.
Just do it.
Okay, so end of June, understanding not everybody's going to be able to make it, but throughout the year, hopefully you can participate in at least several of them. So why don't we choose, sometime in June. And you know what, just to keep it simple, I'm going to choose exactly 3 months from here. So it'll be second. Like sometime how about June 29th?
What day of the week is it?
That would be a Thursday. And where is everybody? Does this location work for folks? It's kind of central. It's, except for you, I mean, yes, and that is totally fair. You're driving a long way. I just want to say it's also totally legit. We love having people in person. You don't need to always be here in person. If it's easy, it's far away, virtually.
You've got a beautiful meeting space at Marsh Billings.
You know what? Yeah. Why not? Like, one of them, maybe at some point we can. Yeah.
Also Randolph.
You gotta get a tour.
Randolph, yep.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so I guess the question is it better to have it in one spot or do we want to move it around?
It's fair to move it around.
Yeah, we moved it around.
Move it around?
Regionally, kind of,
Okay.
but not,
Also to park in here is nice.
make sure, we have to make sure that there's Wi-Fi.
Yeah, so in terms of the committee, if we are going to be moving it around, who here is able to host and has the AV equipment that we could utilize? Because we have a spot up in Chittenden County in Williston that we can also utilize. So we have Williston, we have Waterbury, we have Woodstock, we have, UVM, Randolph, Judy, Montpelier. So we do have options. No, Toby's like,
Well, you can set the dates.
Just want to draw attention to the comments.
Yep. Thank you.
You know, I would probably avoid the 29th because that might be part of a 4th of July. I would do it the week before, maybe.
Okay. Wait a second. And fair point, Elizabeth and Mary Beth, rightly pointing out that not all AV equipment is created equal. And this particular setup, I take it you didn't have any issues with hearing us and seeing us then. I'm gonna take that as a no problem.
This is working great, at least in this setup.
Okay, that is something to consider. But
Maybe the next one should just be here. And then,
yeah,
and then we can start moving around.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
All right, so next meeting will be here in the same location. And then we can figure out where it'll be next time at that meeting. And what were we saying around the date?
June 22nd.
June 22nd? Okay. And I will send an invite out later today, just as a placeholder.
And we're gonna stick to the same 9 to 12.
I think that, I mean, what do people think and want?
Yeah.
Does that work? Okay. And before we break, I also want to just recognize this is a public meeting. We're supposed to have a public comment period. Okay, any comments from the public? Thank you. Does that cover it, Steve and Steph? Okay.
Hey, for those of you who couldn't get on Wi-Fi, did you try the SOV secure option?
Several.
Okay, so it'll stay employed.
Oh, that's interesting.
Okay, well, any last comments?
Job.
No, just thank you so much for everybody showing up. And then, yes, please.
I just wanted to acknowledge Bob Pop's work. Bob's been doing this for a really long time. Your wisdom. Through your expertise, just your compassion, everything that you've done for this committee, the former committee, and now this committee too, appreciate so much that you've done here. And I wish you well in your retirement. And also very glad that you're gonna be a public participant. moving forward.
Did I say that?
And Meg, do you want to read it out yourself or do you want me to read it for you? It's a nice,
You're fine.
it's a nice,
Oh.
go ahead, Meg.
Oh, that's okay. You have, go ahead.
I'm gonna read her comment. It says, Bob, you are my superhero, a superhero, and we will miss you so much.
Dear.
But hope you stick with us. Your knowledge and commitment are invaluable.
Oh.
So there's a lot of echoes here and
Thank you.
appreciation. Yeah. So congratulations, by the way,
Yeah.
getting there. Yeah.
I'm feeling ambivalent about it. Really, I've loved my work. I mean, I get up, after 33 years, I get up in the morning and I'm excited to go to work. I mean, how many people can say that? I just, so I was supposed to leave in November, but it kept getting delayed by, due mutual agreement. I was fine.
It was so you could finally get to the formal committee.
Right.
Yeah.
It was
Right in time.
it was my destiny to be at this meeting.
I thought they lost your paperwork.
They did. That was actually
This one on purpose.
That was the immediate cause of it, but I could have left anyway, but there wouldn't have been any overlap, and now we're still hoping there might be overlap.
Is there gonna be?
I don't know, interviews are ongoing at the moment, so it's gonna be down to the wire.
But Bob has helped our agency a lot over the years too. He's always made himself readily available for project reviews. He's gone out to sites with our staff and so he's made things, reviewed plant lists over and over again over the years. And so he's been a huge help to us too. So I appreciate it.
Yeah.
And I was happy to jump in when you discovered the black alder. I mean, that was a big one, really.
Bob, you've always been helpful. You've always responded. You've always helped me ID plants, even if they were a little thick. You've just been a huge asset. So thank you.
Yeah, your name has been shared many times by Kyle and Christina Martz over the years. And so it's great to hear how you've helped our park.
I was out with Kyle looking at swallowwort on the Marsh Billings site.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think he hadn't seen it yet. It was like one of the first populations. That was a long time ago. It's probably everywhere now.
No, actually, it's been controlled.
Okay, good. Yeah. See, that's what you can do, actually control it, at least locally.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, everybody. It's been
Any
great.
last comments?
Enjoyed
Anybody else? Before we adjourn? Okay, well, thank you, everybody, for making this so productive for the first meeting. And I'll look forward to seeing everybody in June. Thank you.
And how long do you have the room for?
Right now, until noon, but I don't think, but I think it's pretty empty here. I think we can stick around until we're kicked out. So, okay, thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
For playing.
Thanks, everybody.
See you guys. Hi, Meg. Hi, Kathy. Hi, Spinny. Hi, Mike.
Let's go adopt a rule.
See you later. Bye.
Take
Bye-bye.
care. Okay, I am stopping recording.